We regulate all kinds of different industries, from alcohol to construction industries, pharmacies, pharmacists. So it's actually been a really good fit for cannabis to be here, as RLD is very familiar with licensure and regulation. So here is a list of the presenters, and very quickly, I will just kind of talk about some of the topics that we will be discussing in today's presentation. So from the Small Business Development Center, we have a presentation typically done by Debbie Moore, who's unable to join us today, a Cannabis Chamber of Commerce, which is a great resource to connect entrepreneurs and aspiring entrepreneurs with other entrepreneurs. Then we have the New Mexico Economic Development Department, New Mexico Angels, which is an angel investing group. Then we have from RLD, we have our Securities Division and Financial Institutions Divisions, so they can help talk through issues and concerns related to securities and banking. Then we actually have representatives from banks that do bank with cannabis companies. So that is Erie Group and Southwest Capital. Then we have another RLD division, the Construction Industries Department, the New Mexico Office of the State Engineer, which deals with water and water rights, the New Mexico Department of Agriculture, which deals with seeds, and just, if you're interested in growing cannabis, they're a good resource. Then we have Taxation and Revenue, then Seedcrest, which focuses on employee training programs. And then lastly, the Cannabis Control Division will give our presentation. So we'll go ahead and start with Sbdc. As I mentioned, Ms. Moore was not able to be here with us today, so I would encourage you all to reach out to her directly with any more specific questions. Here you have her contact information. She's the president and CEO of the Greater Las Cruces Chamber of Commerce, the president of the New Mexico Chamber Executives Association, and the New Mexico Small Business Development Center Advisory Board, and former chair. So as you all know or may know, cannabis is legal on a state basis, but still illegal federally. And as a result, there are a lot of barriers that entrepreneurs in the cannabis industry will face as they go through starting their own business. One of those is can be seen on this slide. So currently, due to federal rules, the Sbdc is not permitted to provide regular assistance and direct one-on-one counseling services to existing or planned cannabis businesses. However, there are 3 specific services that you all might find useful and are accessible to you all. And those services are the following. So there are low to no cost trainings and workshops on a variety of topics on how to start a business generally. We've noticed that a lot of persons who are interested in the cannabis industry have not had previous experience in owning businesses themselves. So the Sbdc is a great resource to connect with resources on how to start a business and general concerns that you should have as you move forward in your endeavors. Then there are also resources available to you all on their website, NM as in New Mexico, sbdc.org. That acronym is New Mexico Small Business Development Center.org. So that I encourage you all, for those of you who have not started business before or been involved in entrepreneurial pursuits, to go ahead and to check out that website. And then there is also a disaster preparedness guide. So, feel free to check that out to be prepared in the event of an emergency. So there are trainings available. Like I mentioned, that's one of the services that is available to the public, or specifically to cannabis entrepreneurs. So please check out their website to find links to current trainings, workshops, and events. And like I mentioned, they cover a variety of topics. It could be how to start a business, how to market your business, how to market your business online. It's just a variety of topics, and I think it's a really great resource. So there are, like I mentioned, some resources on their website, and here are just some examples of those resources. So how to tell if I'm an entrepreneur, that's a test that you can take. Is it a good idea to start a business? Basic steps to starting a business, how to choose a business entity, so whether it's corporation, limited liability company, or another sort of structure, how to write a business plan checklist, marketing plan framework, how to write a marketing plan, and a startup budget template. I would encourage you all to look at these resources if it's your first time starting a business, to really kind of think through some of the issues that you may be facing as your first time as entrepreneurs. And there is another resource under the Sbdc frequently asked questions. So these are, very basic questions, but it provides some really great answers. So for example, I want to start a small business. Where do I begin? What is a business plan and do I need one? How long will it take me to write a business plan? What businesses should I choose? Can the Sbdc tell me what bank, lawyer, accountant, or insurance company is the best for me and my business? So those, again, are just some examples of questions. There are many more on the website, so please check those out. And then the disaster preparedness guide is on their website as well. This guide has numerous checklists and handouts to aid businesses in being prepared to respond and recover from any disaster. Sorry, 1 second. So then the available resources to you all are general business information, access to government agencies information, and referrals to appropriate and relevant agencies and businesses and their best practices. So I encourage you all to reach out to the Sbdc with any additional questions. The specific Sbdc branch, Debbie Moore, she represents Las Cruces, but she has said in the past that she is more than willing to help any entrepreneur from any part of the state. With that, we will move to our next portion of the presentation. Apologies, having a bit of technical difficulties, but I will resolve those shortly. Okay. So we have our next portion of the presentation typically done by Mr. Indy White of Pure Life. He is also, I believe, the board president for the New Mexico Chamber of Commerce. He was not able to be with us today. So again, I will be going over his slides, but I encourage you all to reach out to the Chamber of Commerce directly. And I believe Indy included his contact information at the end of this portion of the presentation. Though if that is not the case, feel free to reach out to the division and we will put you in contact with the Chamber of Commerce or Indy. So just to give you all a kind of a background on Indy's experience, the application for a medical cannabis establishment used to be, it is no longer, but it included 1,200 pages of application materials. There were 87 applicants who initially applied and 12 producers were approved. And Pure Life itself has 4 grow operations and 9 dispensaries. The first Pure Life was on Carlisle and Manal. So Indy and other members of the Cannabis Chamber of Commerce, they have been part of this industry since the very beginning, when it was just exclusively under the Department of Health and just the medical cannabis program. And so there's a lot of institutional knowledge that not only Indy has, but the organization itself has. So I would encourage you all to reach out to the Chamber of Commerce with specific questions on cannabis business specific type questions. So the Cannabis Chamber of Commerce itself was established in 2018. It currently represents the majority of licensed producers and manufacturers in New Mexico. The elected president of the board in 2019. They do work closely with us at the CCD and also with members. So it's a good way to kind of consolidate communication from the industry and then present it to us as the division. They work collectively to promote the industry as a whole, and they are looking to start a micro business subcommittee. So that committee would be specific to exploring issues related specifically to micro producers and integrated micro cannabis establishments, which are a license type that we will touch on later in this presentation, but essentially the idea is that they're smaller operations. So Indy was very helpful in kind of putting some tricks of the trade and some things to consider specifically for cannabis businesses. And he made a point to say that leases are one of the most important contracts you will enter into. I think this is general of all businesses, but cannabis in particular. So he said to be prepared to sign a personal guarantee. So essentially, you would have to be ready to assume some personal liability in case something went wrong. That's again kind of the nature of cannabis, given the federal illegality of it. So there's still some kind of quirks in the industry that don't exist in other industries. Um, he also thought to make sure to include reasonable language with regards to smell. So just essentially to ensure that the landlord has an understanding that there might be some smell that comes with a cannabis establishment, but to make sure that it's a reasonable amount and it wouldn't impact your tenancy negatively. I would definitely reach out to Indy if you had questions specific to the exact language. He gave an example here, a little excerpt of the sample language that he's included in the past, um, and he's more than happy to share that language. We'll put this presentation on our website as well and send it to the participants so you have it on hand. But for any further questions, please direct them to Mr. White and the Cannabis Chamber of Commerce. And another point, he said, don't settle for a cannabis tax, which by that he means an increased price simply because of cannabis. Some landlords, because of the federal illegality, will essentially hike up the prices because of what they see as a risk in allowing a cannabis tenant. So again, with questions on how to deal with that, I would direct them to the Cannabis Chamber of Commerce. Another thing to consider if you have a dispensary is parking availability. He says to be prepared to bootstrap from the beginning. Be aware of implementing permanent discount programs. They are nearly impossible to unwind, I believe, because consumers get used to a particular price and then will get upset if you raise it. So market to your target audience, not just what you like. So by that, he means what are your customers looking for, not necessarily what you as a customer would be looking for, because there could be a difference between what the market is demanding and what you as an individual demand. And so just to be ready to adjust your expectations to what your customers like. And then lastly, he said to find a good debit card processor with low fees, which would be around $3.50. So for those of you interested in grows, if you're growing in, here's some tricks of the trade for you all. So if you're growing indoors, make friends with people in HVAC. Outdoor flower is going to have a more time passing testing. They require more pesticides. They can be subject to, pests and just the elements. LEDs are the future and they're worth the expense, according to Mr. White. Curing is just as important as the cultivation process, and start working on a power upgrade yesterday. So ASAP. It is very energy intensive to grow indoors if you will have an indoor grow. So that is something to keep in mind. And then lastly, his recommendation, which as a regulator, I highly, highly recommend that you follow. It is your responsibility and yours alone to know the laws. It takes a full day, week, or month. Make sure you know the rules surrounding your business. Don't let someone give you a summary version of the rules and regulations, and protect your license. I know this is Indy's presentation, but I just want to reiterate a few points here. It is super important that you have someone on your team or you as an individual know the rules and regulations that you need to be following. We are moving from a completely unregulated market to a regulated market, and there are some growing pains. A lot of people who have been in this industry in the past are used to obviously not following regulations as it was illegal. But it's really important now that if you are planning to move to a regulated space, that you know exactly what those regulations are, because ultimately it could affect your licensure. And affect your ability to actually follow through with your goal of having a business. And then I also wanted to touch on the don't let someone give you a summary version of the rules and regulations. The amount of times that we've heard, well, I heard from so and so, or I heard this and that. It's really important that you make sure that you are individually familiar with the rules and regulations and are not going off of someone's interpretation of what they are. We're happy to point you in the right direction and give you the resources to where you can find those rules and regulations. But ultimately, it's up to you to read them and understand them. And if you don't individually want to do that, please, please, please make sure that you have someone on your team, because we do not want to come in and, from a compliance perspective, have to correct anything that could have been corrected by just knowing upfront what the rules and regulations are. So with that, we will be moving to the New Mexico Economic Development Department. We have Mr. Max Gruner on the call, who will be talking on their behalf. So you no longer have to listen to me for the next few minutes. Terry, if you could go ahead and unmute Mr. Gruner, and I will just let me know when you want the slides to be changed, Max, and I'll do that for you.
Fabulous. Good morning, everybody. And I was wondering, you did such a good job with the previous two presentations. Maybe you just want to run mine. Hey, my name is Max Gruner. I'm the tribal liaison for the state of New Mexico Economic Development. I also work in economic development in central New Mexico. And if we could go to the next slide, please. You'll notice that as a lot of organizations have, we divided the state into 6 regions. Take a look. If you find yourself, if you can identify, your location and your county, you will see on the left here myself and my 5 colleagues. There we are. With phone numbers and emails. You can always reach out to me, but you can also reach out to my colleagues if you want a more direct line with people who have experience on the ground. I will also quickly say before we pass to the next slide, I will have to hop off right at 10 o'clock. I will leave my contact information in the chat, including my cell phone number. And then it is my understanding that you will have access to this presentation and all the other presentations. So don't feel like you have to take a ton of notes. And if we could please go to the next slide. I will touch upon a handful of programs that we have in-house at New Mexico EDD, Economic Development Department. I want to say as a grounding statement that adult use recreational cannabis is really a new industry for us, and most of our programs have been on the books for a while. So we are trying to learn how to apply these programs to this new space. So not any different from, other disruptive industries, whether it be Uber or Lyft or Airbnb, right? We are trying to adapt something that was created when the legislative intent really didn't envision a time when adult use cannabis would be legal in New Mexico. And so there are some systemic challenges that we are experiencing as we're trying to apply these programs. So the first program I wanted to touch upon is the JTIP program. JTIP stands for Job Training Incentive Program. And essentially, this is a program, and I think it's one of the best ones in the country, where we, the state of New Mexico, can come to the table and we can reimburse a business upwards of 50% of the salaries of net new employees during the training and onboarding period. And this time period will be somewhere between 2 to 6 months. And you might ask, well, how do you determine whether it's 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, or 6 months? And it has to do with the complexity of the job. So typically, it is only on the manufacturing side of your business that we would be able to come to the table to support these new positions. And then depending on the complexity, right? Is this advanced manufacturing? Do they need to program machines? Depending on the complexity of these positions, it increases the amount of time that we can potentially reimburse you, the job creator, upwards of 50% of the salaries for their training and onboarding. Next slide, please. The next program that I think is really exciting is the CAP program, the Collateral Assistance Program. This program is a little bit unique in that money does not exchange hands. What this program allows us to do is help secure under-collateralized loans. So, if you were not in the cannabis industry, when I talk to other businesses, the example I typically give is if you walk into a traditional lender, your Wells Fargo's, your Bank of America, and you ask for a business loan, and the bank wants to give you a business loan, and then they look you in the eye and say, so how are you going to secure, how are you going to collateralize this loan? And you start struggling with that a little bit. We, the state, and those instances can come in sideways, and we can secure 50% of the principal of your loan up to $250,000. Now, the reason why I framed my discussion of this program in kind of this half-hearted kind of way is, as you know, and as Robert Sachs just reiterated, cannabis is still federally illegal. And so none of the federally regulated financial institutions will be able to execute a loan on your behalf. The reason I keep this program in my presentation is twofold. There is at least a hypothetical possibility that CDFIs, Community Development Finance Institutions in New Mexico, would potentially be able to execute loans for business owners in the cannabis space. And if CDFIs were to do so, then we would be able to come to the table to help collateralize those loans. Robert didn't mention it, but there was some talk of RLD in partnership with NMFA creating a loan program specifically for people in the cannabis space. It is my understanding that that program is not up and running yet. If this is a hypothetical, if it were up and running, again, New Mexico EDD would be able to come to the table to help secure those loans. Next slide, please. Again, we do not micromanage what you can use those loans for. If you're able to get a loan, essentially anything you might need that loan for, we would be willing to work with you to collateralize. Next slide, please. The next slide is the rural job tax credit. There's a lot of information on this slide. I'm not going to go into the details. It's a pretty basic job credit. If you are in a rural region and you create a net new job, you can apply for the rural jobs tax credit. And essentially that is $1,000 per job, and you can apply for this tax credit for 2 consecutive years. So essentially over 2 years, over 24 months, it's $2,000 per job. Next slide, please. The high wage job tax credit, again, not going to spend a lot of time on this, but essentially if you are in an urban area in New Mexico, the benchmark as to what is considered a high wage job is $60,000. If you find yourself in a rural area, that benchmark is at $40,000. You can apply for this credit, and the position and the person has to be in that position for 1 year before you can apply for this credit. And 1 year is understood as being 44 weeks, because we do understand that, things happen, people leave, people are asked to leave. So it gives you an opportunity to backfill for this position. You can apply for this credit for 4 consecutive years. So this is a really great credit, but again, you do have to hit those salary benchmarks. Again, $40,000 in a rural area, $60,000 or higher in an urban area. Next slide, please. This one is a really important fact in the state of New Mexico that I am always surprised that a lot of manufacturers do not know. And let me say something quickly. I use the term manufacturing a lot. We're pretty simple-minded about what we mean by manufacturing. You know, you use a raw material, you apply a process to that raw material, and the final product is substantively different from the raw materials that went into that product. So we have a saying in the department, you know, we cannot help you feed the cow, but we can help you make the cheese. We cannot help you grow the chili, but we can help you make the salsa. So by analogy, you know, really it's the value added products at the final stage of your process that we as a state entity are able to support. Now, the gross receipts deduction, I want to make sure that everybody is aware of that. In the state of New Mexico, any consumables, so anything you use and anything that gets destroyed or altered in the manufacturing process is exempt of GRT taxes. And here's the kicker. That includes utilities. So the electricity you use in the manufacturing process of your products is exempt from taxes. Okay, next slide, please. The Local Economic Development Act, also known as LEDA, this is really, you know, most of the phone calls we get is about LEDA. It is a grant. Grant is a little bit of a misnomer. It is actually a reimbursement for what we call LEDA eligible expenses. And those are expenses on five line items and five categories. You can use LEDA to reimburse yourself against costs incurred for the acquisition of land, the acquisition or the construction of buildings, tenant or infrastructure improvements. You know, you need a curb cut, you need a new ventilation system, mortgages, or rent or lease abatements. Those are the five categories that LEDA can be applied against. The other thing about LEDA is, and this is really, really important, can you go to the next slide, please? Let me make sure this is, yes, this is the correct slide for what I'm about to say. LEDA is tied to your ability to create jobs. In order for us to be able to hold you accountable for your job creation, you have to be able to secure the full amount of the LEDA grant for the duration of the contract that you engage in with us. And that is important for this industry for two reasons, because by statute, we need robust security. We need things like letter of credit, surety bonds, liens on buildings, et cetera, et cetera. So you will immediately notice that, you know, a letter of credit, who executes a letter of credit on your behalf? Well, it's a financial institution that's regulated by the feds. I believe that it's going to be close to impossible for somebody in this space to get a letter of credit to secure a LEDA grant. A surety bond is executed typically by a insurance company. Is it hypothetically possible that an insurance company would execute a surety bond? I think the answer to that is yes. Have we seen any executed in this space, in this industry? The answer to that is no, as far as I know. So again, the security issue is, it's non-negotiable. We are statutorily bound to require security, and it's going to be a challenge for you to find the security unless you own a building outright and are willing to put the State Economic Development Department in first place on that building through a lien. The other thing I wanted to point out is you need to have full licensure through RLD prior to applying for a LEDA grant. So we are not able to even review the application until you can provide us proof of full licensure through RLD. Next slide, please. So we already talked about that. That's again the 5 categories. Sometimes we abbreviate it. You can use leader for land building and infrastructure. And that is my presentation for today. As I said, I will put my email and my cell phone number in the chat. Please reach out if you have any questions. And with that, Robert, thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Max. I appreciate it. Next up, we have a portion of our presentation from the New Mexico Angels, an angel investing group, and we have Drew Tolchin, their president, on the call. Drew, take it away.
Thanks so much. Just a sound check in terms of volume and clarity for me, please, Robert.
Sounds good.
Okay, great. Thanks everyone, and always fun to follow Max because he's so animated and doing great things. Strong supporter of New Mexico EDD and many of the other partners on this call. We've been doing these calls for a year now, so I've gotten to really know a lot of these organizations, and we work with them closely. So really encourage you to make use of them for the cannabis market, but also other sectors where I think they are truly adherents to seeing New Mexico be better for economic development. And you should be encouraged to use the benefits of New Mexico, which is that we're small, we're interconnected, and that we all work together. Next, please. So what I want to do is 3 things today briefly. Number 1 is I want to just share with you broadly what New Mexico Angels is. Second of all, want to specifically talk about how it works for investments. And then third, apply that towards particularly the cannabis market, whether it's retail, wholesale, or otherwise. All right. So the mission of the organization is that we're very focused on New Mexico-based companies, New Mexican entrepreneurs, and products that are going to make a difference in our state. If you look at our website, nmangels.com, we have our portfolio listed under our portfolio. I would say that we're not super knowledgeable about your sector. So that it does take some educational efforts. We have done last year some CBD and some value chain agricultural efforts. First Crop is a logo there in the slide that you're seeing. We've also worked with Respect Wellness, which is a CBD-based wellness and health product. But we're not knowledgeable about your space. And so there is an educational element that is needed, which I'm sure you're faced a lot in the industry these days. But I think the more you can get good at helping people understand why this is good business, while risks are managed, and how investors are going to earn a return on capital, those factors are helpful in your business story. I think the more you spend time whining about registration or how hard things are, things like that, investors are going to be turned off because your competition, so to speak, and I use that in air quotes, is these other types of companies that you see here, where we worked with 11 companies to have angel investors. So these are individual folks of means who are writing checks collectively. And so they invested $4.2 million. And that New Mexico Angels worked with more than 80 companies to provide feedback, assessments, mentorship, and other engagement. And we touched around 2,500 people through events, education, trainings, and other activities. Next, please. We're part of a regional network. So an angel is, again, an investor. The actual legal definition is what's called an accredited investor, which basically means that the investments that this person can make, they can afford to lose. And the reason why such a thing is necessary in the United States is after the Wall Street crashes of the 20s and the depressions of the 30s, the SEC, the regulatory bodies were created basically so that people, the average person, couldn't just invest in a company. You can only invest in public companies. And so most of you are private companies. And so there's a number of laws and rules nationally around how that works. Some of those are changing in the 21st century, crowdfunding in particular, but there is rules and regulations about who you can have checks written into you for. And so, we have to adhere to these larger worlds. And so if you are going to be a formal company or corporation or an LLC, we are going to have to do things by the books on our side if you're looking for capital to grow your business. We are part of a regional network. Rockies Venture Club, RVC, is our partner to the north, and Colorado has a longer history of experience. with commercial cannabis, and so we certainly turn to them to share opportunities. We get deals from them, we give them deals. So there's a network. And then there's also a regional, what's called the Angel Syndication Network. So if we work with a company on investment, we can share your materials further out to other angel networks. And there are people, either individuals or entities, who have interest in that. Next, please. So our theory on this stuff is the idea that in New Mexico, we're looking at the village to raise the proverbial child. You heard about NMEDD, you'll hear from our bankers, you'll hear from New Mexico Finance Authority. And there's a lot of folks who are interconnected and know each other. So it's worth not being in a silo, and don't put yourself in a silo, and don't also make sure you're being truthful with all parties, because I see Max as an example weekly, monthly. And so if he and I both know that we're talking to you and you're giving us different stories, it's just not going to look good for you. So be honest, be transparent, be true. We work with startups all the time. We know how hard this is. So your website needs updating, big deal. Just be honest and truthful about it and do your best. And be thinking about the things that you're doing that are going to help our economy, jobs, taxes, innovation, and some of these things, and help craft your story in a way that the audience, meaning the investors, can understand, right? It's not just about you talking about the things you're excited about, but think about how your information is going to be received. We've had 20, 30 cannabis companies come approach us. How do we know how to differentiate them? Which one's going to be better than others? How do we know that what you're doing is going to be successful? So think about that as how you craft your materials, how you communicate, how you engage with folks. Most of us here want to see you succeed, but most of these organizations have their ways of doing things, and the left hand is going to be different from the right hand, and you're going to have to play the game a little bit. I don't know any other way to explain it than that. But I've had very good success with our government folks and our private folks, and I think most people are here to be helpful. If you don't know, ask questions. Don't try to bluff your way through something. I do angel work every day. It doesn't mean that you should know anything about it. So feel free to ask me questions and educate yourself. And I'm happy to share and invite you to our events and get you involved in our community. Next, please. An example of how the angels work is we monthly have these investor forums. The two companies that are part of it this month is a Colorado company called Orbit Genomics, and then Ganymede Games is that logo on my left here. And Ganymede Games we've worked with for a number of years. They worked very hard on their pitch, their investment presentation, and they're very seasoned of it after a long period of time. They've raised money 3 times and still going. So it's an example. So the thing that Ganymede Games does is it's gaming, online gaming, but it's for the folks like more my age group, the folks who are aging. So the folks who don't want to just do adrenaline rushed first person shooter games, you want to do more thinking games. If you are an old timer and remember Myst, which was a classic puzzle game. And so my point is that they're in an industry that's very competitive, right? Where you've heard 100 companies like them, but they're doing something a little different, and they're able to capture what they're doing different and tell a story. The other thing they did is that they left the coasts, California, and they came to Las Cruces, and they partnered with NMSU. And so they've really worked on their local story. It also happens that one of their founders is a veteran and has a disability. And so they're able to show an entrepreneur who's doing these things, who's overcome personal adversity, and also is using a lot of opportunities to grow the business that's going to be good for New Mexico. Next, please. We have a new effort called the New Angel Club. Think about it as a book club for accredited investors, again, members of New Mexico Angels. But this could be a place where your company could engage with angel investors and get mentoring, get some feedback, get connectivity, and not just for private investment, but again, we might be able to refer you out to Max's programs, to these other things, and so forth. So there's a lot of solutions and a lot of paths. And so stating what your problem and the problem you're trying to overcome helps us engage about that. If you are an accredited investor yourself and would like to get engaged through us, we're a membership-based organization. We have members and sponsors. We would also welcome organizing an event in collaboration together. And so we're always happy to hear about great opportunities you might have to share with investors and with the public. Next, please. The angels are also looking at a partnership where we're looking at what's called a vintage fund. So think about like a wine. Every year there's a vintage. And so it's not a huge fund. It's what's called a micro fund to focus on New Mexico opportunities that are early stage. And this is an early formation. So there's a mechanism for us to build together. And I bring this up to show you that the New Mexico Angels are into partnerships. If you have an industry-wide effort or value chain, you're working with suppliers, or you have a way to affect many, we'd be welcome to hear from you. We're happy to do events like this and speak or join or attend other people's activities to foster a community and an ecosystem. Because even though we live in the desert, what we want is we want a rising tide. We want to lift all ships. We want larger boats and we want more boats on the water. And y'all are part of that in helping to grow a new sector of our economy that's going to make a difference to helping our economic factors. Next, please. Angels do a lot of other activities. We monthly look at new companies so people can submit through what's called GUST, which is a national profile platform, GUST, gust.com. So if you are planning to do a formal capital raise, that's registered securities, multiple investors, a GUST could be a free platform for you so that you can use it once and then kind of have your shingle listed that's available for everyone to see. We have other events that might be of interest to you. We have an office hours monthly. That's a free opportunity for entrepreneurs to get feedback from other entrepreneurs and from our community partners. And so that's a resource that's available to you. And then we meet quarterly in person. The next event will be at Q Station, which is the City of Albuquerque's space incubator on Central. So that could be a good partner for us. Next, please. I've been talking about partnerships and alliances. We don't do this by ourselves. We are about 113 member-based organization. We have 38 sponsors, and it's through the sponsorships that we're able to do more and reach more. And a lot of these sponsors have mechanisms to be helpful to you. So for example, Los Alamos and Sandia that are listed here, they have a program that Max mentioned previously called the MEP, or the Manufacturers Program, or NMSBA. This is where we take scientists, and scientists can study or test certain efforts that a business is doing. There may be restrictions on these entities given their security clearances in working with a pure cannabis company. But I think those of us who are working on more infrastructure efforts and might not be specifically cannabis can still take advantage. I think manufacturers who are looking at product improvements, just like Mac's example of, we're not going to grow the plant, but we're going to help you make salsa. So there are partners that can help with this. Next, please. Additional partners, lawyers. I know some of us are a little wary of lawyers or haven't had a good experience, or they're expensive, but lawyers are helpful. They help us with our IP, our intellectual property. They help us get our company set up correctly, and so forth. Next, please. And so there's a number of partners that can help. I'll call out Black Garden Law, who's one of our partners, and they specifically have expertise in your sector. And these folks you can ask questions to, right? So don't feel like as soon as you start talking to them, there's going to be a charge. Most of these folks are very supportive of entrepreneurs who are respectful. If you want to just ask for advice to see if it's a good fit for you, that might be folks like Electric Playhouse could be a venue for you to do events. 10 Capital Network is national network. 10 Capital Network is a partner of ours that gives a regional approach to get people wider. Next, please. We have membership and sponsorship. We also have an entrepreneur membership. Some people have chosen that level to be able to access our community, to attend our events, and to get mentorship from our existing members. And one more slide, please. I think, Robert, with that, I'll close. We support you in what you're trying to do. There's a lot of ways to make progress, but it all requires hard work. Feel free to be in touch with us. Check out our website, nmangels.com. Look at our upcoming events. Feel free to suggest if you're working on a puzzle, something where you need some help. And do ask questions and get connected through us or others. And we would all like to see more be more. And so for that, I think I'll pass the talking stick back to Robert. I do want to call out RLD and give them a big shout out. It's not easy for a government entity that's looking at regulatory things do something new. And these folks are, I found, to be hardworking. They've done a lot in a very little amount of time. I'm sure anyone can criticize how this has been rolled out at the state level. It's not been perfect. I think we all know that. But I think the intent of our state employees to create a good mechanism is to be awarded. I think we have a lot of state people who sincerely want to see good. And so let's look upon them as allies and not as opponents. And let's look at how we can get help from these folks and a lot of other resources. So feel free to drop us a line if we can help you with your business goal with this one or others. Hats off to you, and please keep doing good work. Thank you.
Thank you, Drew. We definitely appreciate having you on. And next we are going to turn to Division of RLD Securities, and we have Mr. Benjamin Schroep to present. Ben, I believe you're unmuted, and you can go ahead and get started.
Thank you, Robert. My name is Benjamin Schroep. I'm the interim director and an attorney with the Securities Division of the Regulation and Licensing Department. The Securities Division regulates securities offerings, and a security generally means an investment instrument. It doesn't have to be in writing. Like any contract, it can be verbal. The Securities Division also regulates people and businesses that sell securities. We also have a public education and outreach component. We put on events, both live and virtual, help produce and distribute material like traditional printed pamphlets, public service announcements that are broadcasted via internet, television, and radio still. We also have an enforcement unit that employs investigators who are certified peace officers, also attorneys who possess statutory authority to initiate cases based on securities laws violations, and these cases can be brought at the administrative, civil, and/or criminal levels. So who regulates securities? All states regulate securities. They have securities laws. These are generally known as blue sky laws. They began in the early 20th century and became really prevalent after the Great Depression. States and the federal government started to enact these based on the need to reestablish confidence in investment markets and to protect citizens from scam artists, which were really widespread in the early 20th century. Again, securities are regulated on the state and the federal level. And the point of this brief little history lesson is to pretty much tell you the policy behind why we regulate. It's to protect investors, to promote confidence in the marketplace. All right, that's pretty much why we exist. It's to protect investors. Next slide, please. So soliciting investments, right? Trying to get capital. Soliciting investments for a new or existing business may be illegal. Even if the money is coming from your family or your friends, even if funding is termed a loan and not an investment, substance is going to control over form here. Securities fraud is also illegal. And securities fraud, generally speaking, is a material misstatement made in connection with an offer or a sale of a security. Not only an affirmative statement, but also omissions of material fact made in connection with an offer to sell or a sale of a security can also be illegal. There are a lot of laws to walk around in selling securities in any state. As with any major business decision, consider legal and financial requirements that are necessary to get your business up and running. We realize that starting a business is a big deal. It's a real big deal. At least as big as buying a house, right? And it's certainly a good idea to get assistance from professionals that regularly deal with this sort of thing. Consider employing an attorney or an accountant knowledgeable about securities. And if you get anything from my brief presentation, definitely feel free to contact the Securities Division with any questions you might have. relating to registration or obtaining investment in your business. And we'll put the slide up with our contact information in just a brief moment. Next slide. So registrations and exemptions. Registering securities, it really depends. It depends on a lot of facts. There's graduate level classes that deal with registering securities. It's pretty complicated. In short, it depends on the type of investment, investors you might have, how you're going to get in touch with these investors, where the investors are located, how much the investors might be investing. It goes on and on. Again, you're going to have to comply with federal law if that applies. You're going to have to comply with New Mexico law, sometimes even more than one state. The good news is there are exceptions, and many, if not all of you, would qualify for what's known as the small business exemptions. Utilizing this exemption, any exemption really, there's also filing or notice requirements, but they're much less complicated than the traditional filing requirements. And again, if you have any questions about whether your business or your offering fit within one or some of these exceptions, next slide. Contact us. Contact us with any questions. We're here to help. We enjoy working with the public. We certainly want to ensure businesses are complying with the law, and we want you to succeed. Our website is listed there. Also, I've included the direct contact information for our compliance manager, Ms. Nona Lane. She deals regularly deals with registrations and exemptions, particularly small business exemptions. Also, the Securities and Exchange Commission, that's the federal regulatory authority. They have a small business website that has a wealth of information about starting up a small business and obtaining capital. Also, I included the coordinated review program, and that's for multi-state offerings. That actually gets pretty complicated. So again, if you're thinking about getting into a multi-state offering, contact a professional, or again, contact us. Contact us with any questions. That's all I have. I appreciate your time, and good luck to everybody.
Thank you so much, Ben. Appreciate having you on. Next up, we have another division from the New Mexico Regulation and Licensing Department, Financial Institutions. I believe we have the director, Mr. Mark Sadowski, on. Mark, I believe you're unmuted, so I will pass it off to you.
I appreciate it, Robert. Thanks very much. I'm glad to join you all today to talk about some of the banking aspects regarding cannabis banking. Here at the FID, what we do, affectionately known as the FID, the Financial Institutions Division, we ensure the safety and soundness and the prudent management of the state-chartered financial institutions within New Mexico. And it doesn't necessarily include just the banks, but it also includes the credit unions, the trust companies, the escrow companies. We also oversee mortgage companies, as well as almost any consumer lender, small dollar loan companies, motor vehicle finance companies, and money services businesses. So one of the questions that we get here at FID a lot is why doesn't my bank, or why can't I find a cannabis-friendly bank? And it really comes down to two main issues. Number one, of course, is risk. There's a tremendous amount of risk with cannabis banking. And then there's also compliance issues. But those two together really drive up the cost of offering cannabis-related banking. I want to go over a little bit of the legal history so you can understand what the institutions in New Mexico have to deal with. And if you'll forgive me, we use the term currently marijuana because all the guidance really talks about marijuana and marijuana-related businesses. So that is going to change. I'll talk about that in a minute. But really, it starts with 2013, and Justice Department issued a memo called the Cole Memo, named after the Deputy Attorney General at the time, that issued it. And what it did was kind of open the door to cannabis banking in the U.S. What it did was, the official title is the Guidance Regarding Marijuana Enforcement. What it served to do was limit the investigative and prosecutorial resources to address the most significant threats deemed under the Controlled Substances Act related to marijuana. And those included distribution to minors, revenue going to gangs and other criminal enterprises, using state-authorized marijuana activity from being used as a cover for other illegal drugs such as heroin and methamphetamines. It also dealt with focusing on violence and firearms and cultivation and distribution, driving under the influence of marijuana and things like that. So that was the Cole Memo. A year or so later, the FinCEN, which is the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, issued guidance to financial institutions regarding BSA expectations. BSA stands for the Bank Secrecy Act. If you haven't figured out by now, a lot of us in the financial institutions arena deal with a lot of acronyms. So BSA primarily deals with money laundering for our regulated institutions. And they issued the BSA expectations regarding marijuana-related businesses. It was based on the Cole Memo, and it relates to providing financial services specifically to marijuana-related businesses. It outlined the due diligence and reporting requirements that financial institutions have to perform in order to assess and to mitigate the risk of providing services to marijuana-related businesses. Most recently, in 2018, the Cole Memo was rescinded, but the FinCEN 2014 guidance still lives on. There is hope on the horizon. In 2019, the Safe Banking Act, SAFE, again, it's yet another acronym, stands for the Safe and Fair Enforcement Banking Act. It was introduced in Congress in 2019, but it did not pass. Fortunately, in the last session, the Safe Banking Act was reintroduced in both chambers. It received a lot of bipartisan support. It did pass the House, but has not yet passed the Senate. What this bill will do is really create much more of a safe harbor for institutions offering, and here's where the nomenclature changes, to cannabis-related businesses. So they understand it's not necessarily just dispensary, but all cannabis-related activity. So it does change the nomenclature from marijuana then to cannabis. What it does is provides protection for financial institutions. It prevents punishing financial institutions for providing services that are in compliance with state laws that have already passed laws that legalize cannabis. It does not relieve the due diligence requirements, however, of the FinCEN memo. So it still keeps all of that in place. As I mentioned, the bill is stalled in the Senate. Committee wants to, leadership wants to include the bill in a proposed broader cannabis reform legislation. So right now it's stuck there. Hopefully with the next Congress, we can get some movement on that bill. But for the moment, we have what we deal with today. So next slide, please. Let's go back one more. There we go. So some of the due diligence that your institution has to follow. And again, this is what primarily drives up the cost and then prevents a lot of institutions, especially smaller ones, from necessarily offering cannabis-related banking. All FIs, financial institutions, must assess the risk with the customer and the overall program. At a minimum, the institution has to verify with RLD that the cannabis-related business is duly licensed and registered. It has to review the license application and the related documents that are submitted by your business for obtaining that state license. They request from state licensing and enforcement authorities available information about the business and any related parties. So managers, owners of the business, anybody who has authority, they're requesting information on all of those persons. They need to develop an understanding of the normal and expected activity for the cannabis-related business, including the types of products that are to be sold, the type of customers that are to be served, for example, whether they're medical, recreational, or both. They have to perform ongoing monitoring of publicly available sources of information about your business and all the related parties. They have to perform ongoing monitoring for suspicious activity, including, but not limited to, the red flags described in the FinCEN guidance with respect to potential money laundering activity. Obviously, big cash-based business, so there are concerns that money laundering could occur, and so the institution needs to be diligent that they're performing what they need to do. Refreshing information obtained as part of customer due diligence on a periodic basis, and as it says, commensurate with the risk involved. So you can see a lot of compliance issues. Again, doing that, institutions need to add more staff for compliance, more legal counsel in order to make sure that they comply. One of the other, next slide, please. One of the other things that does drive up the cost of offering cannabis-related services for banking is just the other requirements aside from the due diligence. For example, cash handling. The good thing is I know there's a couple of institutions following me here that will speak to what they do today regarding cannabis banking. But if you're in one of our larger metropolitan urban areas, well, what most likely your institution is going to do is arrange for armored car service to come and pick up your cash. That is not an inexpensive proposition in and of itself. For the smaller institutions who might be out in more rural areas who don't have ready access to armored car service, their staff is going to have to handle the cash that's brought in from your business. So that's going to preclude more tellers to handle those larger cash deposits, more staff, and probably maybe even more space to hold that cash before it's sent off to another correspondent or the Federal Reserve. So more trips to and from the bank for cash services. Again, armored cars, those increased service charges from correspondent banks or the Federal Reserve. Also, because they're holding more cash in the institution, it's likely they're going to have higher insurance costs. On the reporting side, no small measure here, more staff to cover the increased reporting, mainly in the two documents, the currency transaction reporting, any transaction over $10,000 normally. Cash transaction requires a currency transaction report to be filled out. And so that's going to cause them to have more staff to cover the increased reporting. Also, suspicious activity reports, what we affectionately call SARs. There are three types with respect to your cannabis-related business. First is a marijuana limited SAR, and SAR is a suspicious activity report again. So if the institution thinks there's anything potentially odd going on, they're required to fill out a suspicious activity report. A marijuana limited SAR, when the institution reasonably believes, based on customer due diligence, that your business does not implicate one of the Cole Memo priorities or violate state law. The next level of greater concern to the institution is a marijuana priority SAR, when the FI believes, based on customer due diligence, that that your business does implicate one of the Cole Memo priorities or actually violate state law. And then the third one, which you don't necessarily want to see, is a termination SAR, where the institution itself deems it is necessary to terminate your relationship with them because you have failed to maintain an effective anti-money laundering compliance program. So all of that, necessitates knowledgeable staff, increased legal expense, increased cash handling expense, more people just to meet the compliance requirements and the due diligence requirements. So that's one of the reasons why we don't see a lot of institutions doing that. Once the Safe Banking Act gets passed, hopefully it does in the near future, will relieve some of the risk for the institutions and open it up to more being able to offer services to your business. So here at SID, we're more than happy to take your questions, or if you have complaints. Next slide, please. I've included my contact information as the director, so feel free to contact me or anyone else in the division if you have questions related to cannabis banking.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mark. We appreciate having you on. This is the first time that Mark has presented with us from FID, so appreciate having you on today.
Thanks, Robert.
Of course. Mark covered the regulatory side of financial institutions, and now we're lucky enough to have actually two financial institutions that do bank with cannabis businesses on. So the first one that we have is Airy Group, and we have Mr. Phil Forbert on for them. I believe you are unmuted, Phil, so go ahead and let me know when you would like to advance the slides.
Thanks, Robbie. I appreciate you inviting us again, and I appreciate the forum to really deliver this type of information out to the communities, especially those new entrepreneurs who are looking to get into this business, because it is a complicated business, at least from the financial institutions side of things, which is why US Eagle, which is the oldest credit union in the state, we created a division called Airy Group to deal especially with or exclusively with cannabis banking. We're backed by US Eagle's technology, by our experience, etc. And we are going to be here for the duration to serve cannabis businesses to get access to the banking tools that really you deserve to keep your employees and customers safe, and actually New Mexico and New Mexicans safe, and basically just provide you with the type of banking experience that will help you do your business properly. Next slide, please. As Mr. Sadowski illuminated, the process is pretty stringent. We're going to ask for a lot of background information on all principal owners. We're going to ask for detailed financial information. We'll do background checks, both credit and criminal. It has been said to be a little bit intrusive because we really need to go into fine detail to determine where all funds are coming from, to determine all the players in your organization to ensure that they're legit, that they're not bad players. We do that in part to keep the whole industry safe, to keep our banking services active, and to keep your banking, your financial needs available to you. But it is a fairly intense procedure. It usually takes us about 7 to 10 business days from the point of application start. So plan on that and plan on having all of your detailed information ready to go. We base our methods on a company called Safe Harbor Partners. They've been doing that for 7 to 10 years up in Colorado, Washington, across the country. And we've been basically providing the similar services, only tailored to New Mexico. Next slide, please. So part of our due diligence, this kind of echoes what Mr. Sadowski said. We verify your license and registration, all of your state information, your federal information, even your city or municipality information. If you've got your application in, but it's not yet completed, we understand that too, but we'll help you ensure that that application gets processed, not with the state, but back with us to ensure that you're in line and compliant with the state regulations. We will request the state licensing and enforcement authorities information about you from that. We do, that's part of our background checks, part of all the businesses that you might be a party of. We just do that deep of a background check. And we do that, again, Mark mentioned this, we do that to get a good understanding of your normal activities so that we can understand what your regular routines are, so that if you're buying at a certain level and selling at a certain level, we're doing work to ensure that those levels match up. When you have a spike in one without the spike in the other, that might cause us a little bit of concern. We'll reach out to you. We'll try and solve it one-on-one. Basically, we just want to keep all the business operations transparent and available to both us and you so that we understand what your business does, why it does it, and how we can help that. We do that on an ongoing basis. So we'll look at all your transactions, your incoming funds, your outgoing funds, who you do business with, your vendors, your customers, etc. And we do that on an annual basis as well to ensure that that due diligence maintains itself throughout the life of the relationship, the life of your account. Next slide, please. Now, besides all the regulations, Mark did a really good job of explaining what the Cole Memo is, what FinCEN does. But besides all that, there's a true need in the industry to remain or to engage in a compliant banking relationship. Now, the first one is for the benefit of the CRBs, the cannabis related businesses. It provides those records that you're going to need for audits and tax purposes, and even for reporting back to the state on your on keeping your license in good order. It validates all the cash that may come in from your sales. So Mark talked about the anti-money laundering processes. This helps to take all of that cash that you get right now, and we validate it to the point where it can now be entered into back into the economy, if you will. It can be entered into your deposits. It can be taxed, as we'll see later on, but you will have access to that in the whole economy, as opposed to having to keep that cash in a safe and using the cash to pay vendors or employees, etc. You can basically enter into a true banking relationship. Those deposits are insured up to $250,000. Southwest Capital is right after us. Our deposits are insured by the National Credit Union Association, which is very similar to the FDIC, which does the same insurance provider for banks in the state and in the country. The second part that we protect is the industry. By ensuring that each of at least the businesses that we maintain, at least the relationships that we maintain, we ensure that the owners, the operators, the employees, they're all vetted. So it kind of validates the business. It validates the industry. It brings that industry up in, I would say, a cultural perception that it is not a business run by cartels, by thugs, by dime bag salesmen, etc. It's truly a legitimate business. It's run by legitimate business people, and it's basically here to stay. And the more, it's one of the most regulated businesses. So the more that we can ensure that all transactions are validated, the more that we validate that entire industry. And the third component of this is we protect New Mexicans. So by handling your cash securely, Mark talked about armored car services. We provide those services through a third-party service to some of our remote businesses as well in all parts of the state. So we can handle that cash for you. Basically, by doing things legally and making it easy for you to do these things legally, we incentivize all of those operations within the industry and especially within New Mexico to operate above the law with full integrity and without reproach at all. We track and verify all sources of cash and sales, and that allows it to be taxed and brought into the general economy. So the state of New Mexico, when they were looking at making adult use legal, one of the main components of that is tax income. And by ensuring that all of the entities in the cannabis related businesses are doing business appropriately and legally, we can ensure that those tax dollars are coming in as required. Next slide, please. So I've told you all about what what we do. Here's what we can provide to cannabis businesses is a good checking account, a darn good checking account that allows you to do all of your banking online, mobile, in person where you have to. You'll get a personal relationship manager, a personal banker that'll help all of your transactions and special needs. You can get a savings account as well. We'll give you debit cards that are assigned to those accounts that allow you to make transactions appropriately, whether online transactions, bill pays, electronic payments, etc. We also do the ACH, the domestic wires, and as I said, cash handling services. Part of your online and mobile banking services is a remote check capture feature. So you don't even have to come into the bank, into a branch to submit a check. Take a picture of your check front and back, endorse it, send it into your account electronically, and it's part of your deposits. We will help you secure the physical cash. We'll give you access to normal payment channels via the debit purchases, via online purchases through your account, etc. Will help you maintain a compliant and safe operating environment, again, because you're not necessarily having large amounts of cash on your premises or transporting that cash via an employee or yourself to your branch. We bring a service in that will do that for you. All of this allows you to focus on your business. Cannabis businesses are detailed enough, are complicated enough. We're hoping that by providing you a good experience with your financial institution, with your bank, your credit union in this case, that will allow you to really not have to spend too much time on that part of your business. Just focus on making your business successful, and we're there to help you do it. That's I ran through that pretty quick, but go ahead, next slide. If you have questions, here's our contact information. On our website there with /cannabis banking, there's an online application form. You can give us some of your information and we can use that to contact you via email or phone call or whatever and get you started, or at least give you an overview of our services or fees, etc. And got an echo there. Essentially provide. I can't do it with the echo. I'll just stop at there, Robbie, okay?
Sorry about that, Phil. It seems like I have an echo as well, but our next presenter is Shannon Cox from Southwest Capital. Shannon, take it away.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Yes, we can. All right, great. I'm not going to reiterate everything that Mark and Phil went through. Phil and I know each other. I have a lot of respect for the program that they put together. Ours is very, very similar. We're going to have the same product line. We're going to make the same requirements of you. We're going to want to understand, like he says, it's very intrusive to be a cannabis business with the relationship with your bank. We want to know everything. We expect transparency and truthfulness, and we give that right back to you. So when you're looking to start an account with a financial institution from the cannabis industry, you're going to want to have your ducks in a row before you ever come in. Have your business set up already. Have your business documentation drawn up. Your whether you're incorporated, we need the articles, we need the operating agreement, and it needs to be detailed. We need to know who is associated with this business, what percentage do they own, what is the structure of the business, who's going to be signing on your accounts. We're going to want to know where's your startup money coming from, who are your investors, who can we expect to see you do business with, who are you going to be making checks and wires to, where is this money coming from, who are your suppliers. So we need to know all of that. As far as the ownership structure, even if you have owners of the account that are not going to sign on the account, we're going to need full information on them. We'll need, the usual identification, tax ID numbers, addresses, phone numbers, etc. So I'm not going to go into all of that again. There's a little bit about our bank on here. We've been doing cannabis banking for 7 years now. We were the first ones to jump into it. We learned some lessons along the way. We do have a fully compliant program. We are regulated by FDIC and FID with the state of New Mexico. We are an entrepreneurial bank. We want to establish relationships with our customers, and we want to know that we are your partner in your business, and we care very much about the cannabis industry. We're very proud of the fact that we were the first ones to jump into it when a lot of people were laughing at us and pointing fingers at us and expecting us to fail. And that's kind of what you expect when you go into this industry. Next slide, please. This goes through some of our values. As I said, we are community focused. We want to bank our community. We service the entire state of New Mexico. And as Phil alluded to, with banking and technology, we don't need to have a brick and mortar location to give you full banking services. We have full online capability, courier services to get your deposits to us. We partner with a third party for that as well. We do have accountability. We have a very strong work ethic, and we put our customers first. And that is especially true of our cannabis customers. They are of high value to us, and you're not just going to hear from us at new account time. You're going to hear from us throughout the life of your relationship with us. Next slide. And of course, the relationships and the entrepreneurial spirit. We really want to focus on the New Mexico businesses. We want to see this business area succeed, and we're vested in it. I do want to go through a couple of things. I'm not going to reiterate all of the requirements and all of the accounts that we have for all that. There are a couple of things I do want to call attention to. Indy mentioned find a good debit card processing. That's a little light bulb went off in my head. I want you to be very careful. There are a lot of new people jumping into this industry. Everybody wants a piece of the cannabis pie right now. There are some new credit card processors and debit card processors out there that are calling on you all, and they're going to call on you all, and they're promising you the moon. I want you to understand that Visa, MasterCard, Discover, and American Express are not cannabis friendly. And it does not matter whether you are upfront with them and say, yes, I'm a cannabis business and expect to get in through the front door. You'll learn that's not going to happen. So when a business comes along and says, well, we're fully compliant with Visa or MasterCard, and we have a backdoor entrance that we can get this processing done for you, please be very careful. It may work for a month or two, but then you'll find yourself without services, and you may find yourself blackballed from ever using those services. So please do your homework. Be very careful about those sales calls. Mr. Gruner did say that the banking industry is not lending to cannabis. We at Southwest Capital Bank are beginning to lend. We do have a cannabis lending program. It's restrictive, but we are becoming a little bit more comfortable with it as we go along. So don't hesitate to reach out and ask about that as well. There's another thing out there called a cashless ATM. It's another payment processing method. Visa has been in the news. They are going after these companies aggressively and shutting them down, and they are levying fines. So be very careful when somebody comes in and says, well, hey, I have this cashless ATM I can put in there, and that's how you can process your cards. As I said, transparency and truthfulness with your bank is very important. We will be doing ongoing due diligence. So when we call you and ask you a question about a transaction or anything different, or maybe we see a difference in your transparency, your transaction volumes, or anything may be going on, please be very truthful with us. We want you to succeed. We want to provide services to you, but we're being very protective of our ability to do that, and we're very protective of you as well. So if we think that you might be doing something that might not be the safest thing for you to do, we're going to tell you. But we expect you to be very truthful with us going forward. That's really all I'm going to say. At this point, you've heard so much from everybody else. We do have some contact information out there. I have a young lady that works for me named Cullen Monaco. She is our business development for cannabis. She's amazing. You can reach out to her through our website. You can call her and ask for Cullen. We are, like Phil said, it's not an overnight or a one-day deal to open an account. We have a lot of due diligence to do. We're going to ask a lot of questions, and it's a process. It may take a week or two to get that account going. So please understand that. And right now, there's a lot of volume coming in. So we are running a little behind, but we do value your business, and we're very excited to see this cannabis industry take off. And that's all I've got, Robert. I'll stick around for questions and answers at the end.
Thank you, Shannon. I appreciate it. Next, sorry, I guess there's still an echo. I think it's gone now. Next up, we have another division from the construction industries, another division of regulation and licensing, which is the construction industries division, and we have the director, Clay Bailey, on. Clay, I believe you will be muted momentarily. And at that point, I will let you take it away. Terry, if you could unmute Clay. There we go.
Good morning, Robbie, and thank you. And I want to thank everybody for participating with this program. Mine will be pretty short, but some of the things I'll go over are the frequently asked questions that come to us. And number one, does New Mexico have a building code? And yes, we do. For your review, we've got them all listed, the codes we have currently adopted and what we work under. Keeping in mind, all new construction, and we're talking about on the commercial side, all new construction and most remodeling requires a permit, plan review, and inspections. To request a permit, you've got to be a licensed contractor. So any individuals out there that are, converting a building or building something new or doing some alterations, be sure to get with a contractor. It's going to have to be a licensed contractor. It's just a very limited things under the commercial side that you can do yourself. Nearly all the stuff, because of safety aspects, will be required to be done by a licensed contractor with the plans and the permitting and inspections completed. As you're looking for a contractor, get on our website, www.rld.nm.gov, click on the Construction Industry Division link, and you can go to PSI and you can research and make sure that contractor does in fact have a license. If you can't find them there, you can still reach out to us and we'll go through it and help you look and make sure they are. With the things the way they're going right now, the cannabis is taking off, construction as a whole is taking off. We're seeing more and more unlicensed activity out there. So we're working really hard to curtail it, but we need you to be diligent on your part too. Next slide, please, sir. What types of cannabis or commercial cannabis businesses are permitted through the construction industry? Basically everything. If you're doing any remodeling, you're doing any building, you're doing anything along them lines, if it's a structure, we're going to need to look at it more than likely. We even get so far as into when they're doing the extraction LP gas side of it, we look at the LP gas extraction side of it too. So be aware of that. Please contact us if you need help with it, and we'll be more than happy to help you. A lot of things, with everybody trying to get up and get moving forward, how long does the permit take to get through CID? Our goal is to do it within 10 days. I think we're down to around 14 business days right now. We're moving them through pretty quickly. As with everybody else, we've had some change in some people and staff, and we're filling positions and retraining. But you can generally expect a permit to make it through our division within 14 days. During November, December, you'll see a lag time when the solars hit us, but other than that, we're pretty well on top of it. Any questions or related general building and code related questions? We get questions about using connexes and, changing buildings from one structure used to another. You'll usually get a response, usually the day of, but hardly ever longer than 2 to 3 days. Most of it, and at the end of the slides, I'll have you, if you can, take Martin's cell phone number. He's our general building bureau chief, and his email, and he'll reach out. You can contact me, but a lot of them I'll still filter back through him, as he's got all the knowledgeable answers to go along with that. Next slide, please, sir. The certificate of occupancy, that becomes an issue and can be a real challenge. Generally speaking, if you change the occupancy, change the footprint, change it from where they're doing cooking and processing, or you change it from a storage to manufacturing or warehouse to office spaces, you will have to get a new certificate of occupancy, and you won't be able to move forward either through the fire side, fire marshal side, or our side without that. So be aware of that, be prepared for it. If you've bought a storage facility just for storage and it's been used as storage, more than likely you won't have to, but it'll be a case by case. But for the most part, I'd say 98% of them, you will have to get a new certificate of occupancy. When you do go about that, they're going to have to meet the current building codes, and they must be complied with. That's another reason we're really trying to get out front with you and everybody that's attending to, if you're going to lease a building, if you're going to build a structure, if you're going to convert a structure, please reach out to us. Let us help you know what you're getting into. That way you know what the cost will be, or if there is any cost. But it's really tough if you get in there and you purchased a warehouse and all of a sudden you turn it into a grow facility, and we come in and tell you can't do it without spending so much money to get it done. The money side's not on us, but it'll cost it without a doubt. So we're trying to get ahead of everybody so you can be aware of what you're getting into, so you can make your business plan appropriately. You'll also, a lot of times, we kind of work hand in glove with these guys, the state fire marshals, local fire marshals. They'll be reaching out. They'll be part of the inspection process, exits and that type of things. And a lot of times it's hard to tell us apart. So if you have any questions about that, again, you can reach out to Martine, or we can, in fact, get you linked up with whoever your local fire marshal or who your state fire marshal person is. If in doubt, always contact Martine, and we'll have his slide there. And I just want to piggyback in on what Robbie said earlier. As much as we're trying to help you and we want you guys to succeed and want everybody to have a good experience with this, it's still your responsibility to know the rules. And that it goes for the construction side of it too. So, if you get in there and you start building, we hear this all the time. Well, we didn't realize. Well, it's still your responsibility. We're going to do the best we can to help you, but keep in mind that you've got to know the rules and what you're getting into and what you're trying to change it to. Next slide, please, sir. Here's my email address. You're more than welcome to give me an email anytime. I listed Martine's cell phone number. He's a very easy person to get a hold of generally. Like I said, he'll do it from 1 to 2 days. Richard Lucero, I need to update this. He's no longer with us, so it'll be either me, he recently retired, so it'll be Martine or myself that you contact. With that, Robbie, I'll hand it back to you, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Clay. Appreciate it. Next up, we have 2 portions of the presentation that are normally done by representatives of these organizations, but they weren't able to make it today, so I will be presenting on their behalf. Obviously, since I'm not a representative of these organizations, if you have more nuanced questions, I would direct them to the organizations themselves. So I'll be going over the portion of the presentation that covers material from the Office of the State Engineer, so everything related to water, and then also the Department of Ag, so questions around agriculture, crops, seed sales, things like that. So starting with the Office of the State Engineer portion, all water use requires a valid water right. When you turn on your faucet, that actually, there's a water right attached to the water that's used in your own home. Typically, municipal water providers have those water rights. They may be acquired, purchased, conveyed, and transferred, almost like real property, like land. If you think about, you can lease land, you can buy land. can transfer land. Water rights also can be transferred. One thing to keep in mind is just because you have water on your property, that does not necessarily indicate that you have a water right. And then another further distinction is even if you have a water right, there are certain types of water rights, and that can determine whether or not you can use it for cannabis. To that point, cannabis producers must acquire valid irrigation rights for outdoor cultivation or commercial water rights for indoor cultivation. That's a very important distinction. Irrigation rights for outdoor and commercial for indoor. If you're unsure of what type of water right you have, if it's irrigation or commercial, please contact the Office of the State Engineer. You must acquire them if you do not already have them, if you want to grow cannabis. Please do not start investing or building a structure on your property without knowing for sure whether or not you can use the water that you have on your property for the purposes that you intend. Transfers of water rights do require a permit from the Office of the State Engineer, and all permit approvals will require meter installation and reporting. Going back to that first point on outdoor cultivation versus indoor cultivation, the Office of the State Engineer defines indoor cultivation as greenhouses, hoop houses, so temporary structures that can be used in, and some people kind of think of them typically as outdoor cultivation. But for the purposes of the Office of the State Engineer, they consider them for indoor. So if you do have a greenhouse or a hoop house, you will need to have commercial water rights. Irrigation water rights will not cut it. Domestic wells. So this goes back to the point that was on a previous slide of just because you have water on your property does not mean that you can use it for growing cannabis. So if you have a domestic well, so a well on your property that you're using for personal purposes, you cannot use it to grow crops, any crop, for sale, and that includes cannabis. So if you are planning to grow something for the purpose of selling it, you cannot use a domestic well. Some areas disallow outdoor watering by law, so that's something to keep in mind, depending on where your land is located, and this may apply to transfer water rights into a domestic well. So then surface water, you have ditches, rivers, streams, springs, or other water sources have rights associated with them. You must have the right permit or have the right by permit or other type of right to divert the surface water. And surface water may be transferred by making an application for permit with the OSC. Again, if you're unclear as to whether or not surface water that's on your property or near your property can be used for the purposes of commercial cannabis, please reach out to the Office of the State Engineer. So buying and selling water rights, they are transferable by a recorded warranty deed. Those rights are specific to that place of use and point of diversion and require a permit to change them. And again, that process can be done through the Office of the State Engineer. Please be sure and research the water right prior to making a purchase. I know that there's a big desire to rush into the market as soon as possible, but it's really important to make sure that the land that you're looking at does have the correct amount of water rights, because the last thing you want to do is be making a purchase that you've sunk your money into, and then you realize you have to go through this very long process to move water rights to that property, which can take anywhere, I think, on the short end from 6 months to a year. So one thing to keep in mind is not all claims to water are valid. So someone may claim that they have a water right on their property, but again, just checking with the Office of the State Engineer would make sure that you in fact do have a water right. Some people are misinformed as to whether or not they have a water right. They misunderstand the type of water right that they have, or maybe they were told that they had a water right and they actually do not. So just be sure to check with the Office of the State Engineer. So like I mentioned, the timeline to transfer water rights, the current backlog of water rights applications is over 500, and those are non-cannabis related. So it's just, a process that cannabis will be rolled into. So all applications are processed in the order by which they are received and complete, and the average processing time is 8 to 10 months without a protest. And if there is a protest, that could lengthen the process. So I actually misspoke earlier. The processing time seems to be 8 to 10 months rather than 6. If you are in an area that has municipal water supplies, that will require a statement from that supplier to show proof of a valid water right. So for example, if you're in the city of Santa Fe or Albuquerque or Las Cruces, or any city that has a municipal water provider, they will need to have a letter that says that you are a customer of them and that you can either use that water for cannabis, for the purposes of growing cannabis or agricultural use generally. So if you are in a municipal area and are going to be using water from a municipal provider, you don't have to go through the Office of the State Engineer to confirm a water right, because those municipal providers, like I mentioned before, they have their water rights associated with their company. And so if they're allowing you to use the water in that way, then that's fine for the purposes of licensure with us and also for the purposes of the Office of the State Engineer. So again, if you're in a city, you do not have to go through this process of transferring water rights. Water rights are attached to municipal providers. So that may be an easier way if you have land or if you're purchasing or renting a space that is within a municipal water provider, you will likely have an easier time proving your water right. So these are the district office locations. There are different districts. As you can see, District 1, Albuquerque, 2, Roswell, 3, Deming, 4, Las Cruces, 5, Aztec, 6, Santa Fe, and 7, Cimarron. If you are around those areas or confused as to which district you may be, please contact the Office of the State Engineer and they can direct you to the right office. And then any questions that you have, please send them to water.nm@state.nm.us or osc.webmaster@state.nm.us. And the name of the Director for Water Rights is John Romero, so you can direct any questions or concerns to him. And so next we are jumping into the New Mexico Department of Agriculture portion of the presentation. All individuals who are growing or selling any viable plant species, including cannabis, are required to obtain a plant protection license that is with the New Mexico Department of Agriculture. There needs to be authorizations to grow plants, so there will be an inspection of plants for plant pests, and that can happen at any point. The Department of Agriculture can issue a stop sale for non-licensed businesses and non-compliant plants, and can also authorize the remediation of non-compliant plants, so require you to grow plants or house plants in a way that is compliant with NMDA rules. And again, to reiterate a point that I made earlier and one that Clay made, please make sure that you do your research on the front end to ensure that you are compliant, so that you know that what you need to do and don't incur costs either doing something incorrectly that you ultimately need to correct. If you know at the start what you need to do and who you need to talk with and make sure you're in compliance, in the long run, that will save you money and time. So moving to pesticides, the only pesticides that can be used are registered with the New Mexico Department of Agriculture. So that list is updated monthly. Please be sure to check that list to make sure that if you are using pesticides, that they are on the approved list. As part of testing requirements, you will be required to test your plants for pesticides. So if there is a pesticide that is not part of that list that is detected in your crop, that could lead to your crop not being able to make it to market. So please be sure that you know which pesticides can be used if you choose to use pesticides. Commercial applicators require testing and licensing, so applicators of pesticides, and there also need to be worker protection standards in place. So this is applicable for growers with employees and users of some pesticides. 25B products are exempt for worker protection standards. If you have any questions on those, please reach out to the New Mexico Department of Agriculture. And there are consumer and grower-based or protection-based laws. One thing to keep in mind is regulations often can be seen as burdensome or an annoyance at best sometimes. But ultimately, a lot of these rules are in place to ultimately protect the consumer and ensure a healthy marketplace. So please be sure, again, to do your research on the front end so you know exactly what you need to be doing. So continuing on with pesticides, there are some authorizations. If the Department of Agriculture has a complaint submitted by the public or employees of a cannabis industry, in this case, or a cannabis business, they can go in and inspect. They can inspect the licensed applicators and also businesses and records, and they can remove plant tissue to determine pesticide residues. So they would remove a portion of the plant to send it for testing. The Department of Agriculture also regulates weights and measures. So the Department of Ag will inspect scales annually that are used in the trade. If you own a scale, you may request services from a third party approved by the Department of Agriculture for testing or repair, and this is to ensure consumer and industry, the consumer and the industry is protected. The Department of Ag can inspect scales at will, including addressing customer complaints. It also might behoove you all to make sure that your scales are properly calibrated. You don't want to accidentally be selling more product than you think you're providing. That could cut into your revenue streams. And the Department of Ag will also test for compliant labeling of packaged articles and remove from service any non-compliant scales or packaging. So related to seeds, all seeds must be truthfully labeled with respect to germination, purity, and identification. The law does not specify who can test for those things. Again, this is a consumer and industry protection-based regulation, and questions on how to determine the germination, purity, and identification, you can reach out to the Department of Agriculture. They had a very interesting presentation that I attended a few months ago talking about how to determine the germination rate, purity, and identification. And then the authorities related to seed law, the Department of Ag may inspect and test packaging for compliance at will or after a customer complaint. And they also may stop sale of non-compliant articles, so essentially prevent seeds from being sold if they are non-compliant. If you have any questions on the Department of Agriculture, please visit their website at nmda.nmsu.edu. The acronyms are New Mexico Department of Ag New Mexico State University.edu. And the phone number for the Department of Ag is 575-646-3007. So with that, we will move to the next portion of our presentation, which will be done by Mr. Mark Chaikin of the Taxation and Revenue Department.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for letting me present a little bit later today. I also have with me today Jennifer Harrison, who's also with the Taxation and Revenue Department, and she's going to be telling everybody, oh, sorry, I failed to start my video. She's going to be telling everybody about the registration process. So we're going to take a little bit of extra time today. Thank you. Could we go to the next slide, please? This slide just demonstrates the executive leadership team of the department. I won't linger over that. Our cabinet secretary and deputy secretary are listed there, as well as I am. I would note that if you do have questions about tax, it's good to direct them to the tax policy office. Next slide, please. So sales of cannabis are subject to two different taxes. There's the general gross receipts tax, which applies to all receipts, including receipts of cannabis businesses. And then there's a special tax, which is the cannabis excise tax, which is codified separately in the statutes. And so not all sales are subject to taxation. I'll get into that a little bit in the next slides, but there's different classes of cannabis sales. There's retail, there's wholesale, there's medical, and what we're calling adult recreational, and those are going to be treated slightly differently. And then I'll talk a little bit about what businesses' responsibilities are with respect to tax. Next slide, please. So what taxes apply to cannabis sales? First, there is the special cannabis excise tax. You have the statutory reference there. That tax rate starts out at 12%, and it will go up gradually over time to 18%, I believe. Then we have the gross receipts and compensating tax, which is again the tax of general application to all businesses. So it's not specific just to cannabis, but it applies to everybody. And that consists of not only a state tax, a state gross receipts tax, but also may include local option gross receipts taxes. Municipalities and counties have the authority to impose their own taxes under the law. So there will be an overall tax rate that includes the state tax rate and the local option tax rate. I would note that the legislature passed this year and the governor signed recently into law a reduction in the state gross receipts tax rate. It's currently at 5.125%. It will be going down 0.25% in two stages. That's 0.125% this year and 0.125% the following year. So we'll be left with a rate of 4.875%. And again, local option rates will vary depending on the locality. Tax rates are vary wildly around the state. Some localities have not imposed any tax, so you'd just be looking at that state tax rate. Other localities, the state tax rate can exceed, the overall tax rate can exceed 9%. And then I wanted to say a word about destination sourcing, which is how you determine when you're looking at the local option, which local government's tax rates apply. And that is a special consideration under gross receipts tax. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, there are different classes of sales. The cannabis excise tax applies by its own terms only to retail sales. So it wouldn't apply to wholesale sales. It would only apply to retail sales, which are sales made to retail customers, either at the store location or that may be delivered under, which is permitted under law. And only non-medical sales are subject to the excise tax. Meaning that sales pursuant to the Compassionate Use Act are not subject to the cannabis excise tax. So as a retailer, you're going to need to keep a careful track of those different classes of sales, of what are medical marijuana sales, medical cannabis sales, and what we are calling adult recreational cannabis sales. It'll be very important to keep track of that so you know which receipts are taxable. The gross receipts tax applies to all sales. However, there are deductions that are applicable. So a deduction applies to wholesale sales, for example, because the tax code allows a deduction for sales of certain products for resale that would include most cannabis. So if you're a cannabis product manufacturer, for example, if you're manufacturing cartridges for a vape pen, or you're manufacturing edibles and you sell those on to a retailer, or you're selling bulk flour onto a retailer, there should likely be a sale for resale deduction that applies. And again, only non-medical sales are subject to gross receipts tax, but medical sales are deductible. And in the next slide, I'll make it clear why that distinction is important, why cannabis excise tax doesn't tax those at all. Gross receipts tax says that all receipts are taxable, but you can deduct certain receipts. So next slide, please. Local option gross receipts taxes, as stated, also do apply to cannabis sales. The destination sourcing that I talked about in the previous slide, that's pursuant to section 7-1-14. And that looks to, that's a recent change that became effective July 1st of 2021. The change in how we source. And sourcing means, well, where do you look to? Which taxing jurisdiction rate do you look to when you're trying to figure out what the local option rate is? Most retail sales will be sourced to the retail location where the purchase is made. The sourcing rules say where the product is delivered, essentially. So where the cannabis product is going to be delivered. So for someone who walks into a retail establishment and purchases a cannabis product, that will be the rate where the retail location is. In the event delivery is permitted, and it is permitted under the law, subject to licensing, sales will be sourced to the delivery location. So, for example, if your store, your retail establishment, is located in Bernalillo, the town of Bernalillo, but you are delivering the product to an unincorporated part of Sandoval County, for example, you will use the rate where the product is delivered. So that in that case in that example would be the unincorporated rate, the rate in the unincorporated area of Sandoval County. So again, just to make that clear, if you're a retail establishment located in the town of Bernalillo, someone walks into your store and purchases a cannabis product, the local option rate that is applicable will be the Bernalillo rate. If you're delivering that cannabis product to Sandoval County, the rate will be the Sandoval County rate. On TRD's website, we do have a map called a GIS map that allows you to type in an address and it will tell you what the rate and the code are for purposes of reporting. And at this point, we're now at this point where most billing software links automatically, or there is billing software available that links automatically to that map. So you don't have to go do a separate operation. When you type in, if you're making a delivery and you type in the address, it should automatically, there's software available that should automatically enter the correct rate and code. So you charge the correct rate and report using the correct code. As I mentioned, wholesale and medical sales are likely deductible. There is a medical sale deduction, and wholesale sales likely can take advantage of that sale for resale deduction. But you will need to report that, and you will need to use the correct code. Again, just using the rules I just went through. Next slide, please. So your business responsibilities. First of all, you have to register with the department, and my colleague Jennifer will be talking about that shortly. And that is required even if you have no taxable receipts. So you need to register separately, I believe, for each program. And so you may be a wholesaler solely. You may only have wholesale sales of cannabis product that would qualify for a deduction. You still need to report on the GRT. Cannabis, those only retail sales need to report it for the cannabis excise tax. So you might not have to register there, but for GRT, very important to note that even if you have no taxable receipts, even if all of your receipts are deductible, you still must register and report. Filing and payment. The due date is the 25th day of the month following the date of the receipts for both taxes. So if you make a sale at any time, for example, during April of 2022, then the report date would be the 25th of May. Electronic payment and filing will be mandated. We already have a mandate in place for filing. We've recently worked out all the complications with electronic payment, and we will be issuing a mandate for that shortly, long before any filing and payment is due. Waivers and exceptions may be granted. There will be forms available on our webpage to request such a waiver or exception. Compliance will be required for license renewal. This is one of the many reasons it's very, very important to comply with both your registration and then your reporting obligations. Because when it comes time for the annual renewal, you'll need to be able to show that you've complied with your reporting and payment obligations. And finally, you need to keep records pursuant to that statute so that if for some reason your business is audited, you have records to support both the amount of receipts that you've reported and any deductions that you may have taken. Next slide, please. Okay, this is where I will turn it over to Jennifer, and thank you and for your time.
Mark. All right. Hi, I'm Jennifer Harrison, and I'm going to be giving some brief explanations about how to register your cannabis retail business. So first off, we're doing it all electronically. As Mark mentioned, we do have e-file and e-pay mandates going through. The registration as well will be done all online at our tap.state.nm.us, our taxpayer portal. So we have three options here. If you are a completely new business and you have not registered yet with us on our online portal or in our system, you will go to our website and click the Applying for a New Mexico Business Tax ID method. You will, in this process, create a gross receipts tax account, as he mentioned, which is required. And if you are a cannabis retailer, you will click the Cannabis Excise Tax Account box under Special Tax Programs, and it will create a cannabis account for you as well. If you are not a new business and you already have a business tax ID with us for gross receipts tax, currently a lot of those would be like a medical retailer, for example, you don't have an online profile, you'll need to create that online profile first, and then you will be able to apply for a business tax cannabis account with us. If you have an online profile, you buy your gross receipts tax online already, you're familiar with our website, we have a logged in method created that you will log in and click applying for a cannabis excise tax account. We are making YouTube videos for all of these scenarios. They're actually already made, and they will get posted to our Taxation and Revenue YouTube channel on March 28th. So feel free to go there on March 28th and you'll see the step-by-step examples. Next slide, please. Registration requirements. So you must have one of the 3 licenses to apply for a cannabis excise tax account, not the GRT. If you, as he mentioned, if you are any type of wholesaler or anything like that, you'll need the GRT, gross receipts tax account regardless. But for the cannabis excise tax account, you will need to have a cannabis retailer's license ID, the integrated cannabis microbusiness license ID, or the vertically integrated cannabis license ID. You will be required to attach a copy of your license to complete the application from any method, whether it be the logged in or non-logged in method on our online portal. Next slide, please. Some other notable requirements for the application are start date. So the license issue date will be your start date unless it is prior to 401. So if that issue date is prior, it will default to 401 in our system for you. But any date on that or after is of your issue license will be your start date of your cannabis excise tax account. You'll need to have your name, entity type, federal ID number, or social, whichever your business is registered on, your officers of your business, and NAICS codes. NAICS codes are important for those non-taxable transaction certificates for your gross receipts tax account. Some suggestions are right there listed below. You can have more than one code. Next slide, please. Other cannabis requirements. You will be set to monthly as a default. As Mark explained, it is a monthly filing requirement. How do I file? Returns should be filed electronically through our Taxpayer Access Point self-service portal at tap.state.nm.us. How do you pay? Taxpayers can use ACH debit e-checks on our online portal, or you can use a credit card, which is subject to the 2.4% convenience fee. At this time, FedWire and ACH credit payments cannot be accepted for the cannabis excise tax or gross receipts on cannabis excise retail sales. Next slide. And when can I register and file? So we're going to open registrations on April 1st, 2022 on our online portal. You will be able to log in and see the profile in under 3 minutes. I've practiced this many times. It really takes under 30 minutes to even create the online portal profile. Once registered, you can review and adjust your account information. You will be able to file and pay once you get logged in. And as Mark mentioned, filing is due on or before the 25th of the month following the taxable transaction. Next slide. So as I mentioned, you can go and register on as of April 1st. I am going to be doing a brief tutorial with some select few people who I can get an appointment. So if you would like early registration, it will be Saturday, March 26th with me, Jennifer Harrison, and my contact email right there, business.reg@state.nm.us. So if you'd like to sign up for that tutorial with me and early registration on March 26th, please email me and I will get you scheduled for that day. Okay? That's it for me. Thank you all.
All right, thank you both to Mark and Jennifer. We appreciate having you on the call. Next, we will move to Seedcrest. They have education and educational programs and workforce solutions, but I will let them speak on that. So from Seedcrest, we have Miss Jenna Burt-Thames. Jenna, I believe you are unmuted, so go ahead.
I believe I am too. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Excellent. Good afternoon, everybody. Actually, I guess it's still morning there. I'm located in Austin, Texas, so it's afternoon for me. So good morning, everybody. My name is Jenna Burt-Thames. I am the Director of Curricula with Seedcrest, which is a cannabis education and workforce solutions organization in New Mexico. They're located in Albuquerque, actually. A little bit about me, just super briefly. I worked for the medical cannabis program from the fall of 2017 until January of 2019. So I'm familiar enough with the medical cannabis industry in New Mexico, and I've been working with Seedcrest for almost 6 months now. So I know enough to, be able to give you guys some information. I will let you know that the expert lady is behind the scenes right now. She's on the call. So her name is Shannon Jaramillo, and I'll be telling you a little bit more about her as we get to the end of the presentation. But if you do have questions when we get to the question and answer period, she's going to be the one to answer most of those. But I'm going to do my best to get you through this today. So our mission or our mantra at Seedcrest is breaking stigma through education. So one of the things that I've been hearing, I've been listening very diligently today to all the other presenters, and one of the things that I'm hearing kind of over and over again is, undertone of stigma and talking about kind of how on the federal level cannabis is still illegal and kind of what that creates in the environments that we're working in, and the need for education either as an entrepreneur or for your staff to be well educated so that as you embark on this adventure, you're not breaking any laws, right? So that is what Seedcrest is all about. We're addressing that stigma and doing it through education. So throughout the United States, the cannabis industry is completely outpacing the ability to create standards, educate professionals, and get those jobs filled. This is creating a need for companies to scale up really quickly so they can be competitive. Leafly, which many of you are probably familiar with, did publish a report, the Cannabis Jobs Report in 2020, and they found that nearly 250,000 full-time equivalent jobs are supported by the legal cannabis industry, and that was as of January 2020. So we're 2 years later, so that's even more now. And we're seeing a growth in states where maybe we didn't necessarily expect to see those states or those growths. So in Oklahoma, we've seen over 7,300 jobs produced as their medical market has started to grow. We're seeing states like Texas, like Mississippi, actually growing their medical cannabis programs slowly, but they're growing. And so what is that going to mean over time for being able to staff up? Next slide, please. There we go. In New Mexico, as we kind of look a little closer to home, the Michelle Lujan Grisham office has put out a report which talked about the adult use industry in New Mexico and the potential for that industry to create 11,000 new jobs across New Mexico, and to see retail sales that would top somewhere in the neighborhood of $620 million by the 5th year of the program being up and running. That's gigantic. So keeping up with that is key. There are some standard requirements for the folks entering the field, and they're fairly similar to what you would think of for people entering any kind of consumable product market, so like food handling, liquor industries, that kind of thing. So they're pretty similar. Standardization for these jobs is critical to maintaining the quality of the products, for safe consumption for the people of New Mexico, and in ensuring that kind of standardization, there has become a bottleneck that's been created as people are trying to qualify and prepare that workforce. So one of the other things just to kind of note that the turnover is high in this industry. So having people who have gone through some kind of educational process to get them prepared for what they're going to face when they enter the industry is also pretty critical. Next slide. So we kind of touched on this a little bit. When we think of cannabis workforce, we would kind of compare them to, and you can go ahead and push, click again. We would kind of compare them to people in the food industry, alcohol servers, retail industry. So we see some very significant overlap there. But when we kind of think about the cannabis industry, we don't tend to have pictures that look like this in our head. So I want you to just kind of close your eyes for a second, and if we could go ahead and move to the next slide, but don't peek yet. I want you to kind of think about who are those people that you think of when we think about people in the cannabis industry. And if your vision looked anything like, and if you would click one more time, the folks on this slide, you can go ahead and open your eyes. You're not alone, right? Again, that highly stigmatized, and all of these folks are great human beings, but still highly stigmatized, and may have not necessarily been our first thought, or it may have been our first thought when we start thinking about people who are working in the cannabis industry. But really, who are the folks who are working in the cannabis industry? And if we can move to the next slide, and you can click twice, please. So we see people who are scientists. We see families who have started farms. And actually, if you'll click one more time, we can see two folks who are working currently in New Mexico. These are folks that were trained through Seedcrest and placed in the cannabis market here in New Mexico. So, two people who have gone through our educational process and were placed in jobs. Right there on the screen. Okay, we can head to the next slide. So I think when we think of the cannabis industry, we have a fairly narrow view of what that might look like. But Forbes published an article in 2020 that talked about the fact that few industries require such a gamut of expertise to run. From agriculture to new product development and chemical testing to the retail market, all sandwiched under layers of rules and regulations, and we've been hearing about a lot of those rules and regulations this morning. There's work for delivery drivers and bud trimmers and retail people, as well as manufacturing and finance professionals, PhD chemists, horticulturists, and more. So I think we have a kind of very narrow view some days of what it means to be in the cannabis industry. But if you can imagine trying to get people from, bud trimmers and delivery drivers all the way up to PhD chemists and horticulturists ready to hit this market. And some of you will be working with people with those kinds of backgrounds. And so how do you ensure that they're really ready to go when they come into your doors? One of the things that is really important to know about the industry right now is that we do have, obviously we talked about there's a shortage of folks ready to enter the industry. And even more so as we kind of go into the more managerial type roles or the roles that require heavy education like a PhD chemist would. You can go to the next slide. So Seedcrest is helping employers. So all of you who are looking to enter the industry, we are working on standardizing the cannabis industry and making sure that what you all have available to you will meet the standards for the legal parts of the industry or through all of the regulatory folks that we just heard from. We have had about 10,000 people apply for our program since 2016, and we have learned that serving both employees and employers together makes a better quality product for everybody all the way around. And then folks would have, businesses will see similar benefits to the benefits that we have for our employees, and we'll talk about those in just a second, so that they'll get compliance training, they'll have access to software solutions for state data reporting, workforce training, HR solutions, on and on, that are available for folks through our program. Let me head to the next slide. So then for employees, we have what's called our 5-star candidate program. It is a chance for folks to go through and learn about, kind of develop their own professional cannabis portfolio, including creating a industry appropriate resume and cover letters. And then they can take those classes, which are kind of the basic classes, but they can certainly go on to learn a lot more about cannabis biology or the history of cannabis in the United States, current New Mexico state laws, industry ethics, HIPAA compliance for people who are in the medical program, customer service classes, and then risks and warning signs for overuse and addiction, safety and security. And we kind of run the gamut to help those folks get really ready to hit your doors when you start getting ready to hire. As I said, you know, we do see a high turnover in this industry, and part of slowing down that turnover is mitigating risks, attracting a higher quality of, higher caliber of employee, and making sure that those folks who get started in the industry really are ready to start working. And go to the next slide. So we are partnering with colleges and universities across New Mexico to start training folks and to actually make that 5-star candidate certificate even more standardized and more widely available through those college programs. Our forte stems from the fact that we have policy experts, among other experts, and we have developed a standardized curricula. And we have actually, our CEO, our executive director, has been working with the governor's office and with other state agencies and educators to kind of help develop that standardization across the state. And I think that's about it for me. So you can head to the next slide. If you all have questions or comments or things that you want to know, my email address was on the first slide. And then, as I mentioned, Shannon Jaramillo, who is our CEO, is available for folks. If you would like to reach out to her, her email address is there as well. And we thank you very much.
All right, thank you so much. So the very last portion of the presentations will actually be from the Cannabis Control Division, which is the division that I work for. So I will actually be able to talk about something that I am more of an expert in than the other parts of the presentation that I've given so far. So I know that we're running a little bit close to the end of the presentation. So I'll do my best to get through this information, and then we'll take questions at the end. So we'll probably go a little bit over, so apologies for that, but I appreciate your patience. The Cannabis Regulation Act was passed in March of 2021, and in that law, there were some deadlines that were imposed upon the division that was also created in that legislation. So the Cannabis Regulation Act created the Cannabis Control Division, gave us a series of tasks to complete, and then gave us deadlines for those tasks. So the first one was related to producer licenses and beginning to process those on September 1st, which we did. And January 1st was all other licenses, which are available both on our licensing platform on our website, and also as separate paper applications, depending on what type of license you're applying for. And April 1, 2022 is when retail sales are set to begin. So we're looking at about 2 weeks from now that anyone can walk into a dispensary and purchase cannabis. So it's a very exciting time. Obviously, we're very busy here at the division getting ready for that, but a very exciting time for the state of New Mexico. So like I mentioned, we have applications that are available online for producer, micro business, manufacturer, retailer, couriers, vertically integrated cannabis establishments, integrated cannabis established micro businesses. We also have cannabis consumption areas attached to retail licenses that are also available online. We will be updating the cannabis consumption area license, and then working with institutions of higher education on cannabis server permits and cannabis education and training programs. So to give you a sense of the type of licenses that are available and their corresponding fees, here is the breakdown of our license types and their fees. So courier, which is essentially a transportation license that allows a courier to deliver products from a retail establishment to the consumer, that is $250, and then $100 for any additional license within that, or additional person within that license. So if you think of couriers as kind of like DoorDash or Uber Eats, that's the purpose of that license. Transportation between businesses on the wholesale side or as part of the supply chain are not couriers. Couriers are just taking the product from a retailer to a consumer rather than, for example, a production site to a manufacturer site. Testing laboratories which test cannabis for their potency, pesticides, microbials, those sorts of things, that license is $2,500 annually with $1,000 of within $1,000 premise fee. Manufacturers are the same. So manufacturers take the raw cannabis and create products, whether that's a pre-roll or colloquially is known as joint, edibles, tinctures. So manufacturers would pay $2,500 annually for their license fee and $1,000 for every premise that they have. Producers, so the growers of the cannabis, again, $2,500 and $1,000 for every premise. Retailer, very straightforward. Dispensary, $2,500 and an additional $1,000 for every premise. A research laboratory, which essentially determine or researches cannabis mostly for their medical purposes or commercial purposes, that also is $2,500 with $1,000 for every premise. Vertically integrated cannabis establishment, that license type is $7,500 with $1,000 for every premise, and that license actually rolls in together production, manufacturer, retail, and courier functions. So you can kind of mix and match which of those functions you would like as part of your vertically integrated license. You do not have to do all of them, but those are the activities that you can conduct with using your vertically integrated cannabis establishment license. Then we have cannabis producer micro business, which if you're growing 100 plants or less is a $500 license, no premise fee. And if you're growing 101 to 200 plants, that's $1,000, again, with no premise fee. So that would just be your annual cost. You are you're only able to have one grow site. That's also why there's no premise fee. And that's just based in the law that was written. So then looking at integrated cannabis micro business, it's similar to vertically integrated in that you can grow, manufacturer, retail and courier. But again, you are only limited to one premise per activity. So you can only have one grow site, one manufacturer site, one retail site. All of those sites can be in the same structure, the same premise. So if you have all your operations in one complex, that's fine. But you cannot have multiple grow sites. You cannot have multiple manufacturer sites or multiple retail sites specifically for the micro business licenses. So those are the cannabis producer micro business and the integrated cannabis micro business. And then lastly, we have the cannabis consumption area, which is $2,500, and that rolls the licensing fee and premise fee into one. So if you have multiple cannabis consumption areas, you would pay $2,500 per consumption area. One thing to keep in mind is this producer license here does have an associated plant count fee, meaning that for every plant that you all will grow, that you're allowed to grow at any one time, you will be paying a fee for that. The cannabis producer micro business does not have an associated plant count fee. You do have the limitation, obviously, of the number of plants that you can grow, which is significantly less than the cannabis producer license, but you do not have to pay the plant count fee, which is very helpful. You also don't have to pay the premise fee. So this slide actually needs to be updated because we recently changed our rules related to plant count fees. And so the per plant that you're able to grow, that will be $5 per plant, again, for only the producer license or the vertically integrated cannabis establishment license, which has the producer function built into it. If you are only growing medical cannabis, then your plant count fee, actually all of your licensing fees are cut in half. So that would take a $5 plant count fee down to $250. And that's also true of not only producer licenses, but all licenses. If you let the division know that you will only be serving medical patients, then all of your licensing fees, your premise fees will be cut in half. And if you're a producer, obviously your plant count fees will be cut in half. So that's just something to note. Our application is entirely online. We do have Salesforce, a Salesforce platform that holds our vertically integrated licenses, integrated micro license, retailer, manufacturer, producer, and just those actually. And then separately, we have our testing lab, cannabis consumption areas, and courier. They're all located on the same portion of our web page, but some of them are integrated into Salesforce and some of them are not. Please, as we mentioned before, make sure that you have the appropriate requirements of usage, particularly water usage, before you really start digging into and investing in building things on your premise. Please also ensure that you have spoken with CID, the construction industries, to make sure that you have the proper building. The last thing that we want to do is go in to a site and realize that you built something incorrectly. It has to be knocked down and rebuilt. Or the water that you're using is you can't use that water, so then you can't grow plants until you transfer water rights to your property, which, like I said, can be 8 months on the shorter end of things. So please work to get your business plans put together, try and think through a lot of these things. That's the purpose of this presentation, for us to kind of present to you all the considerations that you should have as you're starting your cannabis businesses. So really think about those land requirements, the building requirements. Think about the proposed grow. If you are going to be growing, where are you going to be growing your plants? Is it going to be indoor or outdoor? Again, that affects the types of water rights that you'll need to have. The diagram of the premises, we don't allow, or we don't request that you submit that as part of your application. However, we will ask that you have an accurate premise diagram on site at all times. And the requirements around what those premise diagrams need to contain are in our rules and regulations, which also can be found on our website or the New Mexico Register's website. I'll give you the URL for our website here shortly. But just make sure that you know where everything is, where your grow site is going to be, your drying rooms are going to be, where any office space is going to be. So really think through a lot of the day-to-day of what your business is going to be, not only for the premise diagram, but just in general. There is a portion of the application that has certifications and attestations. It's similar to terms of agreements when you click through websites. I've heard people say, oh, you just click through them and don't read them. It's not important. It's absolutely important that you read them because, as we mentioned, you are certifying legally that you understand the provisions of the application, and that not only you understand them, but you will follow them. So if we show up to you a licensed site, you get a license from us, and we say, okay, where's your premise diagram? And you say, well, I didn't know. It's in the application and the certification and attestation on our application that you do need to have that in place at all times. And that's on the less severe side of things, but if you, for example, do not have the proper registration with your local jurisdiction or the proper zoning, that could be a major problem for you all. So please, 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 please read the certifications and attestations, understand them, make sure that you're following them, make sure that your employees are following them. It's not fun for us, as it's not fun for you all when we have to go in for compliance issues. So please make sure you're knowledgeable of the rules and requirements ahead of time. So the requirements, once you're licensed, there are obviously grow requirements. You need to make sure that you do not exceed your maximum plant count. Your plant count is not annual. If you are a producer, that's just the amount of plants that you can have at any one time. So particularly for indoor grows that have multiple cycles, you actually would be producing, assuming that you have multiple cycles of growth. You would actually have multiple, or you essentially would produce beyond what your plant count allows you to on an annual basis, though at any one time you cannot exceed your plant count. Obviously, the health and safety of your employees is paramount. Please make sure that you follow health and safety, particularly for manufacturers. If you are creating edibles or tinctures or anything that's going to be consumed orally or by any other means, it's going to go onto someone's skin. There are medical products that are suppositories. Obviously, it's very important that if someone is putting something into their body, that it is of the utmost level of health and safety, particularly for medical patients who often have compromised immune systems. So please make sure that health and safety standards are being followed. Again, those are all in rule. And then another big one is the security systems. We do require that people have functional security cameras. Where those need to be placed are also in rule. The quality of footage that those security cameras need to have is also in rule. We also have requirements related to alarm systems. If someone breaks in, we want to make sure that you all will be notified in a timely manner, or law enforcement if necessary. And lastly, every cannabis establishment needs to have a vault. So, and it doesn't have to be kind of in the classical sense of like a bank vault, but it just has to be a room or an area that is secured with a commercial grade lock to ensure that any product or money or whatever you want to keep in there is on premise. But all of those, again, and the details of those are in our rules. The most common application deficiencies that we've been seeing are related to water rights, and actually the diagram deficiencies no longer are really what we're seeing, but background checks as well. So again, please make sure that you have the proper water right documentation if you are not using a municipal water source and are using water rights. And then background checks. Please make sure that, if you do have a criminal background, that you include that in your application and you give a little bit of context. There's an area on our application to describe what type of criminal conviction you may have, and describe the circumstances of that conviction and any rehabilitation that you think is relevant for us to know. There's also just, once you submit an application to us, we will be sending you an additional document that you need to send to the Department of Public Safety for them to run your background check. And so just make sure to get that to them in a timely manner so that they can then get that to us. So the contact information for the Cannabis Control Division, here we have our phone number, which is 505-476-4995. The email address for our division is rld.cannabiscontrol@state.nm.us. My email address is robert.sachs@state.nm.us. Our website is ccd.rld.state.nm.us, and the RLD website is rld.state.nm.us. Actually, the RLD website, I believe that URL has been updated. So you just might, if you want to go to the Regulation and Licensing Department website, you can go to Google and type in Regulation and Licensing Department, and it will bring our information up. I will say that ahead of the April 1 deadline, we are extremely busy. We're fielding a lot of requests, to the extent that you can direct your questions to the appropriate agency. If you have a water question, please send them to the OSE. If you have a question on background checks, you can send them to the Department of Public Safety. We obviously are checking our emails and answering phones as frequently as possible, but there's a lot of excitement obviously, and a lot of questions that people have. So please bear with us as we will get to your questions. We just have an immense amount of outpouring of interest in this program. So um, we will keep an eye on our emails and on our phones. But that is it for the presentation portion of InvestiNM. We will now be opening up this forum for questions. If you have a question, there is a raise hand button on the bottom right hand of your screen. We'll be going down in order of the hands that we see. And unmuting in that order. I'm going to try and answer as many questions as we can. We're already 7 minutes over, so apologies as to that. So we will go ahead and get started. It looks like the first question is from Recreation Station. So Harry, if you could unmute Recreation Station.
Yes, good afternoon. My question is basically on building regulations a little bit. I wanted to know, because I was trying to look through the paperwork, are drive-throughs going to be allowed?
Drive-throughs will be a question of local jurisdiction. So wherever your premises is going to be located, I would talk with that zoning commission to see if they'll allow drive-throughs in that area.
Okay, but as far as the state goes and the CCD, they will be, as long as it's local, fine?
We don't have an opinion one way or the other. We just defer to local jurisdictions.
All right, thank you very much.
Of course. So it looks like the next question is from Reese McWright. Terry, if you could unmute Mr. McWright.
Hello.
Hello.
I have a few questions, but to start off with, how about federal taxes? How are we supposed to apply ourselves to federal taxes? Is it just going to be same as normal as any business?
I'm going to defer to Mark. So Terry, if you could unmute Mark Chaikin.
Hi. Yeah, I don't really want to be in the position of giving federal tax advice. But I would say that, yeah, you have an obligation, I would think, to, whatever form your business takes, file the appropriate income tax return. And, that would very much depend on what form you choose to run your business. I would also know that there are some deductions that are not available under federal law for depreciation. And I don't know the specific section off the top of my head, so I don't want to get into it. But I would, consult with a tax professional is really the best thing that you can do, which is a good idea when setting up a business, is to, talk to your tax professional accountant about that sort of question.
Okay, well, thank you. And also on the application process, they're asking me for my PAR, for my preliminary application registration. Do I receive that from you guys once I start the process?
Yes, I'm not sure why it's asking that or what part of the application process it's asking, but once you submit your application, or actually I think once you generate your application, you will have a PAR number associated. It's just essentially your application number.
Okay. And then, sorry, I'm taking so long. On the New Mexico Department of Agriculture, is there not a separate page or paper within the application process, or do we need to go to them individually?
You'll need to go to them individually as a producer just to make sure everything is good to go on their end. Unfortunately, we're not consolidated in our application.
We need to send that approval in to you guys along with our application.
It's not part of our application, but similar, you just need to make sure that you're compliant with whatever agency it oversees your particular business. So local zoning ordinances as well, we don't verify, but you as an individual need to make sure you're compliant with that.
And then just a last question. Can you refer me to anybody to help me clarify or clear up problems I'm having to get on to the RLD site to apply for. I'm already listed in there, but it's not allowing me to apply for another license. So it's keeping me from applying basically. So I need help with the system itself.
I would send emails to the rld.cannabiscontrol
Okay.
email address, and then they can hopefully help you out. It may be the case that you signed up initially for a micro producer license, which does not allow you to have multiple licenses.
Well, I have a different license for, I'm a therapist, so I have a different license.
Oh, I see.
I'm already registered, and so, but now it's not letting me apply
Okay.
licensing for this.
You might have to just use a different email account and make a new account, and I think that would clear that up.
Okay, thank you guys so much for all of your time today.
Of course. So next up we have call-in user 11. Terry, if you could unmute call-in user 11. It actually looks like they dropped off. So next up we have Garrick Gonzalez. Garrick, it looks like you are unmuted.
Excellent. So first and foremost, just want to thank you guys for putting this on, because this is definitely illuminating to this whole process. My first question is for you, Robert. In regards to an overall average time frame for processing applications, specifically in regards to the vertically integrated applications, can you provide me with an average turnaround time that you guys are seeing?
Average, it really depends. I'm not sure, particularly with vertically integrated. I wish we had our licensing manager on. She could maybe give a little more information on that. But just so you all know, when you submit a vertically integrated license application and you select the different types of functions that you would like let's say you select producer, manufacturer, and retailer, that creates 3 separate applications in our system. So our licensing team will look at the retailer one to make sure everything is good with that, the manufacturer one, and the producer one. So there's an individual review process for each of those functions. So it may be the case that, for example, you get your producer license first, and then once the other 2 come online, then you'll have your vertically integrated. So it really depends on, if there are any issues with your application, which tend to be with water, criminal background checks, and I mean those are pretty much it. Or if there's some sort of if someone typed their name incorrectly, or there's some discrepancy that we have to go back and ask the applicant to fix. So unfortunately, I don't have an exact time frame for you, but hopefully that gave you a little bit of sense in how our process works.
Yeah, I do have some follow-up questions, if I may.
Sure.
So in regards to water, since you did bring it up, if somebody is in the process of acquiring an industrial property, we're on municipal water, the Water Utility Authority, I guess, permission slip letter or good standing letter, is that what is acceptable? Is that what you guys are seeking?
Yeah, essentially, and we have a sample of it on our website as well under the licensing tab if you want to take a look at that. But essentially, it's a letter from a water provider on their letterhead that has your name or address, and then says that that business or that space is authorized to use water, for agricultural purposes or for cannabis purposes. And so if you have that, that's good with us, and you don't need to go through the Office of the State Engineer. One thing that I will note, though, is there's some sort of water provider that's not, it's called I'm actually not entirely sure the name of it, but in some of the smaller communities, I would double check to see what type of organization the municipal water providers are, because there are some potential legal barriers for kind of these smaller towns. I guess they're technically not municipal providers. They have some strange legal setup. And I wish John Romero of the Office of the State Engineer was here to elucidate that. But if you are in a larger metropolitan area, you shouldn't have an issue.
Okay. Now, in regards to the application itself, namely the certifications and the attestations as well, will you all grant a provisional license to an entity who's in the process of attaining those things? And I'm speaking specifically in regards to manufacture and the extraction process. I'm kind of going back between the fire marshal and the CID, trying to get some definitions in regards to fire code and some of the strict rules in regards to having an extraction room. So these things obviously take time associated with acquiring a property as well. We do need to know, and like I need to know before investing, kind of like you're saying, chicken and egg scenario, I need to know that the Cannabis Control Division will at least grant me permission to operate for starting some of these major investments, because they are. What's your perspective on that in regards to people being in the process of doing some of these things in regards to submitting an application for them?
So each certification and attestation has particular language that either says at the point of you submitting the application, you attest that this is currently true, and I believe for zoning and business licenses, we've changed the language to allow it to not necessarily happen at licensure, but that you will be compliant prior to operation. And I could be wrong, but double check that. And so, I think this is another kind of time to reiterate how important it is to read the certifications and attestations, not only read them, but read them closely, because you will see that language change as to, whether or not at the point you hit the submit button, that needs to be true in that moment, or we will allow you to have some time to get some of those other things together.
Okay. Yeah, and I definitely appreciate that. I guess my final question is probably, I guess, more under the realm of the construction industries division. In regards to somebody wanting to verify that they need to have a change of occupancy to change the building or structure that they're going to be using, and make as kind of exploring, and this goes in the same vein of what I mentioned before in regards to the extraction process, who would be the correct point of contact to reach out to kind of get some definitions? I say that, and I guess I'll proceed it with saying that I have called, I believe his name is Martin, and I've spoken with him a couple of times. He's referred me to some ICC codes, some fire codes specifically, but I can't, between the fire marshal and the CID, I can't seem to define or get a clear definition on some of the technical jargon that's listed in these codes. So maybe somebody from the CID could comment on that.
I believe that Clay from the CID had to leave, though his contact information I can put in the chat, and Martine's as well. So I would just reach out to them, and hopefully they can point you in the right direction.
Okay.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mr. Gonzalez. It looks like the next person up is Tessa Small. Terry, if you could unmute Tessa.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, so I'm Tessa with Alchemy Wellness. I had a question in regards to the application process for providers and instructors of the cannabis server permit program. Do you know when that process is going to be opened up?
We don't have a timeline on that yet. We are working with the higher education department and colleges and universities. So we hopefully will have a timeline here pretty soon. We're just looking at April 1.
It did make me restart. Okay. Because
But,
we were actually expecting it around January 1st so that we could start providing those server permits before April 1st, with existing retailers, the medical dispensaries that are already there needing to get this server permit. And so as a provider, a medical provider, we were hoping that that would be closer to January 1st.
Yes, and so apologies, we haven't got that up and running yet. Just a note that it's not currently required in law for retailers to have that, or bud tenders. It's specific to cannabis consumption area, essentially bud tenders at those establishments. But we are working with some colleges and universities to hopefully get a timeline together for that. So keep an eye out on our website. That's true of both cannabis server permits and training and education programs. So we'll have some updates for you all in the next couple of weeks.
So are you saying that the server permit program is only going to be provided by the universities?
Not only, there are opportunities for partnerships, and then I believe for the server permit itself, it can be from, I believe it can be from non-higher education institutions, but for the training and education programs, there at least has to be some involvement with a college or university.
Okay. Okay. So we are looking to help provide that with Alchemy Wellness.
Awesome.
I appreciate your time.
Awesome. Thank you, Tessa. And yeah, like I mentioned, this is a good opportunity for everyone to know that we give updates periodically. So if you go to our website and sign up for our email list, we will send out updates related to different license types or just general updates for the industry as we change rules or things like that. Let's take, I think we have time for 2 more questions. So we have next on the list, we have High Mountain Health and Wellness. And then after that, we'll have Alejandro Baseman. For everyone else, we will have our contact information up on the website. Please feel free to reach out to, either myself or one of the presenters if your question is specific to someone else. We'll go ahead. High Mountain, I believe you are unmuted.
Yes, I am. Thank you for doing this. And all the work you guys have been doing. I wanted to ask you guys, do you anticipate having a New Mexico Finance Authority present on the future of the status of the micro cannabis loans that were announced in the next group?
Yes, that is a great suggestion. In addition, we definitely want to have them on. Like I believe, I can't remember if it was Max mentioned. There is a loan program that is in the process of being opened up specifically for micro producers. And so we will have someone from NMFA on the next InvestiNM so that they can talk about that process and let you all know what the next steps would be for that.
Great, that'd be very helpful.
Awesome.
Thanks
Thank you so much. Of course. And so the very last person that we selected is Alejandro Baseman. Apologies if I mispronounced your last name. It looks like your hand isn't up anymore, but Terry, if you want to go ahead and unmute and see if we have a question still.
Yes, good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi. I just had a quick question. I was wondering what kind of licensing would be required for just seed production if I wanted to grow cannabis for the genetics. What kind of regulations are there on that?
So I believe the nursery license would be what you would be looking for with the Department of Agriculture. Though I would double check with them as to what license type they actually need. Unfortunately, they weren't able to make it to this particular call, so we can't get that answer to you right now. But the name of the presenter, his name is Brad Lewis. If you have any questions, you can look up Brad Lewis's name on the Department of Agriculture website and shoot him a question, and he'll know the answer to that.
Okay, so like besides that particular aspect and having a formal business set up with tax ID and all these other requirements, there really isn't any other restrictions as far as potentially taking that product to dispensaries or offer it in retail locations after recreational sales begin?
Right. I'll say there are no restrictions from the CCD. We do not license that activity. So yeah, as long as you make sure you're compliant with everyone else who would oversee that, it's good to go with us.
Okay, and just one final question. Will there potentially be allowed, or if there is going to be like farmers market style spaces in the future with recreational sales coming to where micro producers licensed with their cannabis could present it in a slightly informal way rather than licensed retailers or anything of that nature?
At this time, the way that the licensing process is set up is that it has to be based on a permanent premise. So pop-up events like farmers markets or conventions or food truck or cannabis truck business models, those just aren't allowed right now. That's just kind of the kind of boundaries of the law and the way that the law is written. So maybe in the future, if the legislature wants to change that, that is something that potentially could come down the pipeline, but that is not something that we can do at this point.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much for your time.
Of course, thank you. And thank you all for your participation. It looks like even though we already had some people drop off, we have more than 100 people. So thank you all for your attentiveness. I know this was a long presentation. Apologies for going over. Hopefully we were able to provide you all some great information, answer some questions. Please feel free to reach out to the Cannabis Control Division, any one of the partner organizations. Everyone on this call is extremely friendly, wants to help out. And so I definitely encourage you all to reach out to all of the organizations or governmental entities. Thank you all for your time, your participation, for your excitement in this industry. We have 2 weeks to go before we hit a major milestone. So thank you all for your support of this industry, and have a great rest of your day.